And I have known Jen for several months now, and can definitely say that whenever you're in the room with her, it's an absolute wonderful experience. So she'll be speaking today on the science of self-sabotage, overcoming imposter syndrome. So Jen is an experienced speaker, imposter syndrome expert, comedian, author, and international executive coach. Jen is on a global mission to empower C-suite level women and their teams to have the audacity to be themselves, to lead without limits. How does she shatter the limiting beliefs that reside within every high achiever? By helping them eradicate imposter syndrome with a powerful combination of story and strategy. Her standout speeches are packed with humor, information, and actionable steps leaders can implement immediately, step into their highest leadership level, and thrive. So again, I think Jen's theme here pairs very well with the game changer leadership. And I think some of the tips she'll be giving today will apply to you no matter where you are in your career. Jen?
Thanks, Jennifer, so much. And thanks to everybody, ISM, hosting this particular conference and inviting me to speak. I really appreciate it. And Christine, when you were sharing the statistics about the lack of women being promoted at the same rate as men, it made me think of a stat that I always use, which is in 2018, there were 25 women leading Fortune 500 companies and 23 men named John. Since that time, 3 years later, a lot of it having to do with the hashtag Me Too movement, there's now 41 women leading Fortune 500 companies, only 2 women of color. And I think as you go along today and with this particular piece on imposter syndrome, take it to heart that it is necessary for you to elevate your leadership and get to, even if you don't want to be in the C-suite, but you want to be in that VP level. Every time you stretch yourself, you will experience imposter syndrome. That is without a doubt. And we'll talk about the science behind that. So this is why I say you want to make it your superpower. And I always label my talks how to overcome imposter syndrome, because I always like to say, and I will say this, I'm not going to teach you how to overcome it, because you can't. Because when you're trying to come over something, the thing you're trying to come over is stay stuck because you're still trying to overcome it. So you're embedding that habit, those thoughts that you're having about feeling less than, or, women traditionally, when they look at wanting to apply for a position and all the prerequisites, well, I only have 11 out of 12. I can't apply. Most men will look at that, and this is no diss to the men on the call, so this is just statistically what's out there. They will look at 2 things and say, I'm going to apply for it. That takes me back to that experience of imposter syndrome, because imposter syndrome, it's not a syndrome. It's not a medical diagnosis. That's number one. It's when the first 2 people discovered it back in the 70s, Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes, they named it imposter phenomenon because it's something that happens experientially. And in a minute, I'm going to share some slides, but I want to have this conversation with you eyeball to eyeball. It's something that happens experientially. Why? Your brain, I'm not going to say your brain, the brain that's inside the head, that's on the body, called you, okay? That brain's job is to keep the thing it's a brain of alive. 40,000 years of evolution or 5,000 years of creation, however you want to label it, that brain is constantly determining threat. That's that fight, flight, or freeze. That's your amygdala. That's the very, the reptilian part of your brain that's constantly determining threat, kind of scanning your circumstances around you, literally to see if the thing is going to eat you or you can eat it. Why we're on this call and cave woman, bugga, 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 is because she got eaten. So through your, evolution, you were okay. You didn't get eaten. You were smarter than the thing that was about to eat you. Now, the brain cannot see the difference between a real threat, like you're about to step off the curb and a car's coming at you and you jump out of the way, versus you're watching a movie and it's a scary movie. Halloween's coming around. I don't like scary movies for this very reason. And your heart starts beating and your palms start sweating because the brain thinks that killer is about to come to you. Another example of that is if you've ever been on a roller coaster, or not been on a roller coaster, but watching a movie where someone's on a roller coaster and you have the point of view of the roller coaster, your stomach dips just like as if you were on the roller coaster itself. So the brain can't discern between real or perceived threat. The average human brain has 50 to 60,000 thoughts a day. Now, I want everybody to grab a piece of paper and a pencil and write down what percentage you think is negative. Just, what percentage of your thoughts do you think is negative? All right. Everybody got their number? Everybody got a number? Just quick thumbs up. Okay. And what percentage of your thoughts do you think is repetitive? Write that down. And when you've got that written down, for those I can see, give me a thumbs up or a head nod. I'll check you out. Okay, good. Now, somebody unmute yourself and tell me one number. Susie, what's the number you had for a number of negative thoughts? What percentage?
30%.
30%. Anybody have anything higher? Just a thumb up if you had something higher, if I can see you.
Higher, like 60%.
60%. Anybody higher than 60%? I feel like I'm doing an auction. Going once, going twice. Anybody have higher than 60%?
I thought 75% of our thoughts are.
That was my guess too, 75.
Yeah. Okay, 80 to 85% of your thoughts are negative. 80 to 85%. 90 to 95% are repetitive. We don't stand a chance. Now, why is that? Why is that? Because the brain's predicting threat, right? The brain's trying to predict what is a threat. So let me share some slides because I want to share a little bit more to round this out about the definition of imposter syndrome, imposter phenomenon, and then some different ways that you might be able to see yourself in it. Because many times, mostly imposter syndrome is thought of as people who question or doubt themselves. When I'm in the midst of questioning and doubting myself, I don't know that I'm questioning and doubting myself. I just think things are going to hell in a handbasket, and I don't realize that the imposter phenomenon has been triggered. So let me share my screen. And just so you know, I was telling Kathy that yesterday my slides froze. And every once in a while, my camera goes out for no apparent reason because I upgraded my Zoom app, and now it likes to do things like that. So Kathy's got the slides just in case. So hopefully all is well. Let's intend it all goes well. So let me share my screen here, and I'll still be able to see you. Everybody can see it? Yeah? I want to put you back in gallery view so I can see you all. Oh, it's not letting me when I share my screen. I don't like you, Zoom. Okay, fine. All right, so we're looking at how to make imposter syndrome your superpower. So let's first just get a sense of, oh yeah, there we go. Did I freeze? Are we good? Yep, my video turned off. Let me turn it back on, and let me get to this spot so that I can actually start to, something went wrong. I love that. Kathy, are you able to move the slides and share your screen instead? Let's see, I can stop. Let me try stop sharing and sharing again. She might have stepped away for a hot minute. So let's try this again. All right, well, I'm not going to waste time here. So let's just keep having the conversation. I know you can see that part, but it's not letting me go through it. So we'll just keep having the conversation. Sound good? I know, no slides. What are you talking about? It's okay. It's all going to be okay. So Clance and Susan Clance and Pauline Imes, what they denoted as imposter syndrome. Oh, there we go. Now you can see it. Beautiful. You can, the Zoom gremlins are at it. So they are, Julianne. All right, you can advance that. Go ahead and advance that for me. Awesome. So it's not quite, that's okay. It's an intense feeling of intellectual inauthenticity that's frequently experienced by high achieving individuals. Now, research early on thought it was mostly among women, which was not actually, because they thought because men have more testosterone, and testosterone is thought of as the confidence hormone, that somehow women had more of it because they had less testosterone. Not actually the case. It is equal among men and women. I've been coaching people for 23 years, from high school students to members of Congress. Everybody has some form of it. And I tell my clients, if you don't have it, you're not playing a big enough game. Because think about that experience of threat. As soon as you stretch yourself, you go for that job, you raise your hand to organize a conference, to speak, imposter syndrome's going to kick in. Because the brain's like, wait a minute, we don't want to feel any of the negative emotions, which is 80 to 85% of the time, right? first of all, I want to let you know you are among friends. If you could advance the slide, Kathy, that'd be great. You're among friends. So many people experience imposter syndrome. Maya Angelou, it's like, uh-oh, someone's going to knock on my door while I'm writing my 11th book and realize I've run a game on everybody. You know, Margaret Chan, the CEO of the World Health Organization, didn't like being called an expert. With the last year or so we've had, I would like an expert heading up the WHO. It's a good thing she's there. And then this one I love, which is Albert Einstein said, oh my gosh, I'm going to be called an involuntary swindler. Okay, well, let's just have a minute for, I don't know, quantum physics, E equals MC squared, you know, involuntary swindler. And I usually have a Google alert telling me when people have, you know, there's people out there, famous people out there who have experienced imposter syndrome. Jennifer Lopez, before she goes to record the next album. Demi Lovato, name any celebrity, anybody you know that's famous, all of them have experienced imposter syndrome at some way, shape, or form or another. All right, you can go ahead yeah. So Dr. Valerie Young in the early 2000s, she went ahead and created this book, which is phenomenal, and I would highly recommend getting it, called The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women: Why Capable People Suffer from the Imposter Syndrome and How to Thrive in Spite of It. She's got a lot of tips, tools, and tricks. I don't give, and she's been working with people, you know, 500,000 people and made a difference. I just go about things a different way. But I do think using her competency types, people can find themselves in this experience of imposter syndrome, where if I said, do you ever doubt yourself or feel like a fraud, you may not see yourself in that. So if we can go to the next slide, we're going to talk about her 5 competency types. And for those of you that took the quiz, you also know that that quiz was based on her competency type. So let's go to the first one, which is this perfectionist. Now, the perfectionists, let's go to the next slide, please. The perfectionists are people, see, this is the way that you've compensated for feeling less than. Your work's got to be 100% right 100% of the time. You might be a micromanager. You might have difficulty delegating. What I have found for myself and my clients is, while yes, being a perfectionist is something that will stop you from advancing, or you'll be thinking about something so much until it's perfect, you don't want to speak up, it's also your superpower. Why do I say that? Because I had a client who at the age of 9 came home with a C on her test. And this is how I differentiate from all the other work that's out there. It's not about tips, tools, and tricks, because as I said at the beginning, you're going to keep the thing you're trying to overcome stuck because you have to come over it. What I do with my work is we get back to the originating incident, and you're going to get a taste of that today, like an amuse-bouche, all right? Client, 9 years old, brings home a C on her test. Oh, and by the way, as I'm going through these, take notes of which ones sound like you. It won't be, oh, I'm just this or just that. You may hear a little bit of yourself in different pieces. That's fine. So she comes home with this C on her test. Her dad's like, Catherine, why the C? And well, Dad, it's average. Give me 1,500 words on mediocrity. 9 years old, just displeased her father. The brain thinks there's a threat because the brain experienced embarrassment, disappointment. Bam, right there. She's like, I'm never going to get a C. I'm going to get everything right. Perfectionism. Now, she was propelled to a COO of a major organization. Why? Because people counted on her as the chief operating officer to cross the T's and dot the I's. She was counted on for her perfectionism. This is one of the things that I want you to see. Don't get rid of imposter syndrome. It's like your smoke detector. It's going to let you know you're being stretched, and you want to look for the gold in it and how it's helped you advance in your career. So this is the perfectionist. Can we go to the next slide, please? Superman or woman, everything's defined by how hard you work. For anybody that has difficulty with downtime, this is partially you. If you work really hard, everything's going to go okay. Even on weekends, you got to get in before your team, leave after your team. You can't be still. Those are my supermen and superwomen type of competency types that you might find yourself with the imposter phenomenon. What's the next? Can you advance to the next one, Kathy? Right. Rugged individualist or soloist. You got to go it alone. You do not like asking for help, because when you do, that shows somehow that you don't know what you're doing. Another example from a client, 12 years old, walking to the store after school to get ice cream. They go in there. She's with 3 girlfriends. 2 of the girls don't have money. She offers to pay. The 4th girl says, well, there you go again, being helpful Hannah. Embarrassment, guilt that she has more money than other people. Okay, I'm never going to offer help again. I'm not going to ask for it. She advanced, but she couldn't get past that senior VP level because she was so used to doing things on her own. She wasn't creating a team, and they didn't trust her to manage people. Once we uncovered this brain pattern, because in the moment the brain feels threatened, boom, it's got to come up with a way to protect itself. I'm going to do it all myself. And that, again, became her superpower. But then you have a 12-year-old running a company in a 45-year-old woman's body or a 35-year-old woman's body. Once we identified and disrupted that, it was like a whole new world. She could see, I don't even ask my partner for help. I don't ask friends for help. It created a whole new world. She then got a promotion to CFO and is now a CFO at an organization and doing great just by disrupting that one brain pattern. Let's go to the next slide, if you would. Natural genius. This is one that I really identified with. Doesn't take much effort from me to get good grades. I skipped 2nd grade. People always called me the egghead and, bullied me at school because I was a nerd and I was super smart. But here's how that impacted my own life. If I can't see how to get from point A to point B with a clear path, I will procrastinate. And I've now noticed that about myself. And so I'm able to disrupt that and realize, yes, sometimes things come easy to me, but when they don't, I've trained myself to sit silently with a blank page in front of me until I can start just writing whatever it is that I've got to come in contact with or whatever it is that I have to produce. Let's go to the final slide. The expert. Now, these are the people who have to have a lot of letters after their name. You have to get that one more degree. You have to get that one more certification. Or you're in a meeting and you don't feel like you have agency to speak up because somebody else has more letters after their name. I had a client who ran a law firm that was a very specialized area of the law, and she was called on to be the expert all the time, and she would literally almost throw up before she went out to speak if she was asked to be on a panel because she was certain someone was going to find out she didn't know what she was doing. Well, we got to the source of it and again, each one of these moments where we're able to identify where you put that brain pattern together is just an innocuous moment. It's not dramatic. It's not traumatic. Sometimes clients have said, well, I know because I was raised this way. This is why, I had this trauma in my life. And I said, well, if that's actually the source of how come you keep feeling like a fraud or feeling like you need more certifications, you wouldn't be doing that. So that's not it. It's always an innocuous moment. This woman, when she was very young, was a competitive dancer, came in first and saw someone who had come in second giving a temper tantrum. And she thought to herself, I never want to be the person who's doing the temper tantrum, so I better know everything about everything in order to feel like the expert. It wasn't even her own, something that happened to her. It was her witnessing something else. This is why I say it's like small. It's neither dramatic or traumatic. So I want you to just advance to the next slide, please. Oh, go back one. Okay, so just in the chat, we were going to break out into groups. I think we're a little bit behind time, so I want to catch us up. So in the chat, if you can, write in there for yourself, which aspects of imposter syndrome do you identify with the most? Is it a solo superwoman? Is it the expert genius? Is it just the expert? Which aspects of what you saw? Natural genius, the expert, almost like the expert, exclamation point. I got that, Heather. Superwoman. Yep. Superwoman. I think everybody can see this is great. Yeah. Cross between the first 3. Thanks, Larissa. Perfectionist. Yeah. And you can also see that a little of everything. Yeah. That depending on what's happening with you, like perfectionist might come out or expert might come out, because all of these are, again, that experience of threat that the brain's experiencing. It doesn't want to experience disappointment, stress, failure, any of those things. So it's going to compensate, right? It's going to compensate. And that's what these aspects, these competency types tell us, is they're attempting to compensate for some way you feel less than. But I will promise you, There's a source to it. So let's advance to the next slide. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, click it again, please. How can you make imposter syndrome your superpower? I'm glad you asked. Let's move to the next slide, please. So, number one, if you Google how to overcome imposter syndrome, 2.4 million hits out there. And then I decided, well, what happens if I say I want to disrupt imposter syndrome? Because my philosophy is distinct from every other coach out there. Something happened when you were little, it created a brain pattern, and that brain pattern keeps repeating. And we want to identify and disrupt that. So I said, okay, let me Google, what does it take to disrupt imposter syndrome? So if you can advance to the next slide. Well, first of all, let's look at the definition of what it is to overcome something, to get the better of it in a struggle or conflict, to prevail over, or to overpower something. Now, in each of those areas, whether you're getting the better of something, prevailing over something, overpowering something, the thing is still stuck. I'm going to keep making that point. So go ahead to the next slide. 6.4 million hits on how to disrupt imposter syndrome, which all goes back to anti-imposter syndrome, dealing with imposter syndrome, avoiding imposter syndrome, which all relates back to keeping imposter syndrome stuck. You don't want that. So please advance to the next slide. So I want to take you on a little journey. All right. We're going to do a short guided meditation. Okay. And then right after, you're going to write down what you got to. So have a piece of paper and a pen ready. Harken back to that aspect of imposter syndrome you most identify with. Pick one. Perfectionist, expert, natural genius, etc. See if you can recall the last time you felt like you had to get something perfect. You felt like, oh geez, I don't want to take that risk because it's not going to come easy. You felt like you needed to know more before you raised your hand. So just take a minute and think about that. You don't have to write it down yet. In fact, I'm going to ask people to close your eyes. Now, some of you aren't on screen. You may be driving. Please don't close your eyes. So close your eyes and have that thought or that memory, in your mind's eye. And notice when you experienced that feeling of the imposter phenomenon, where you felt it in your body. Was it a heaviness in your chest, like you were breathing shallow? Was it a lump in your throat because you wanted to speak up? Sweaty palms, you wanted to speak up but didn't feel like you knew enough to speak up? Were you clenching a part of your body? Sometimes we tighten our legs. Sometimes we clench our butt cheeks. Sorry to say, but sometimes we do that. Okay, now I want you to see if you can hearken back to an earlier memory of where you experienced the imposter phenomenon. Notice the sensations in your body. Notice what's going on. What are you feeling? See if you can hearken back to an earlier, even earlier memory. Now, see if you can get back to your earliest memory of feeling scared that you were going to be found out, feeling like you had to get it perfect. Maybe it was in school where you were asked, parents were pressuring you to get A's on all your exams. See if you can get back to that earliest memory and see if you can, and for some of you, you may not have a memory, but it's a feeling, it's an experience. You may notice the mood that you were in, the emotions that were coming up, the fear. Now, when you have that moment in your head, okay, I want you to think about who were you with, what time of day it was, and I want you to open your eyes and just write down what you saw for yourself. What was the earliest memory that you had, or the most vivid memory that you had? And go ahead and write that down in your notebook. You can advance the slide, Kathy. Thanks. There you go. And make sure to note any body sensations, your mood, any emotions that came up. And the memory might make absolutely no sense. Write it down. It may seem like it has nothing to do with what you're dealing with. I promise you it does. So write that down. And when you're done, you can just look up. Might need to give people a little more time. That's okay. Okay. Now, I know we're going to take some time, and Jen, I'm just looking at you real quick because I think I was supposed to end at 10:40. Is that right? Or was it 10:45? Just trying to get a sense of how much more time.
Roughly 10:49, 10:48.
Okay, perfect. Okay, good. All right, so here's what I want you to then do. Did everybody write something down? Just like thumbs up, thumbs down? Yeah, good. I want you to look back at what you wrote. All right. And I want you to circle only the facts in what you wrote. What is a fact? Well, some people would question what facts are these days, but it's simple. It's real in reality. Who, what, when, where. The who, what, when, and where. And once you've done that, anybody can share in the chat, what do you see? What do you notice? You know, it's going to take a minute. Goes back to childhood, Heather. Yeah, got that. Now, do you know, Heather, what the situation was? I see poise. Huh.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Heather. What was the situation?
Hang on a second. I gotta close the door.
That's okay. Sorry, I called you in without letting you know. Hey, Heather, I'm about to call on you. Close the door.
No, for me, to be fully transparent and vulnerable, I'm fully aware that my imposter syndrome goes all the way back to childhood from my own mother.
And how old were you?
I mean, it goes so far back.
Yeah.
I remember things from before I was 5 years old. That's how far back and how embedded it is.
Yeah, exactly. And what the work that I would do is to get you back to the moment where you decided. And Heather, which one of the competency types did you identify with most?
So I am what we went over a few moments ago, the expert.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the work that I would do with you is identifying when you decided you needed to be the expert, and what was it that you made up as a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old in order to protect yourself? Because once you can identify that, it's like the whole world opens up, and then you can be a witness to what triggers it.
Yep. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So I had a client who, when she was in 4th grade, again, I think that's like 9 or 10, someone said they were 10 years old, and I knew it was after you skipped a grade. Used to feel I was not smart enough to have skipped a grade, and others would realize that I identify with that because I skipped 2nd grade. Feeling in your chest is very present when you remember it. Yeah. So the feeling in your chest, right, the body sensations are going to be red flags and tells for you of when the imposter phenomenon is about to kick in. And what I do with people is we get back to that originating incident, however old it was, because there's some quick decision you made. Client, again, as I said, 4th grade, had to choose a topic to write a paper about, and everyone was choosing the topics, and there was these words on the overhead projector when we used to have those back in the day. And there was a word up there that she picked. She said, I'm going to take bass. And everyone laughed and said, it's base. Well, she was embarrassed. Now, here's what was interesting about that. She doesn't get triggered. The imposter phenomenon, her brain doesn't get triggered when she's about to speak to someone in authority, because she actually went to her teacher for help on how to write the story. It's when she has to present to peers. That's what triggers it. So the work I do, which is distinct, is not overcoming something. We're going to disrupt the imposter phenomenon for you. Identify the triggers that are out there, and then we're going to create a new neural pathway together so that you can show up as the unique leadership style that you are, the unique leader that you are, and harness imposter syndrome to produce more results in your life. That way, at those moments, you're in the driver's seat, not imposter syndrome. Sometimes people aren't even in the passenger seat, they're in the trunk because they're so at the effect of it. So let's advance to the next slide. All right, and then keep going. One more, please. One more. I have no idea what that is. Okay, questions. Let's place those in the chat. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer those. I have a few minutes. Or a yeah, but, or a how about, as I like to say. It may not be an actual question. It may be a comment or a thought that you want to put into the chat. I'm happy to comment on it.
And I don't, while everybody's thinking, if you don't mind, Jen, I'd like to share just quickly my experience with you personally, that after just one session with Jen, I was amazed that she was able to get right back to that exact moment, and it really helped give me some tools, and I've seen a major change in how I approach situations personally. So it's really quite incredible what she does.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you. So Elizabeth asked, is the identification the superpower? The identification isn't the superpower, Elizabeth. It is, so I have a 3-session workshop that's coming up in November that I think we're going to share the link to. I also have a quiz if you haven't taken it, and a Facebook group that's free that you can become a part of. But when we do the work together, Elizabeth, the identification is step 1. Then you want to start to notice what triggers it, so you can be really good at catching yourself. Because the human mind reacts so much, when we're at the effect of something, we're not catching ourselves. But when you can get to the root of it and start to be a witness, you're then, and notice the reaction instead of reacting, you're a human with a reaction. And then all of a sudden you're present. In the moment of being present, you have power and choice of how you're going to respond, what I call response ability, your ability to respond to something calm, collected. And so the superpower is when we identify your unique leadership style. If you weren't busy feeling, if you weren't busy at the effect of the natural genius, how do you want to show up for yourself in the world? And then we identify a practice for you to experiment with that has you show up as kind, curious, caring, empathetic. My client who identified that she was a perfectionist and got the C, we created her being curious because she took everything personally. If it wasn't perfect, she beat herself up. If other people didn't do it perfect, she beat them up. She just, okay, let's just start every sentence with I'm curious. And that for her became her mantra. And so then in the moment when she was at the effect of other people not doing it perfectly or her, she'd get curious about the situation and realize, you know what, I can use perfectionism here, or I'm going to be caring and empathetic to my coworkers who clearly didn't understand what I gave to them. So through that 3-session workshop, you're going to zero in on having imposter syndrome become your superpower. And then Sarah, why does it feel like women have this more than men, even if that's not the case? My theory is because we talk about our feelings more. That's what I think. I also feel, and I will say this with all due respect to men, given the patriarchal society that we have been raised up in and the generations of women that have come before us that have been treated like chattel, that have been treated like an object, it's a generational phenomenon that we inherit in our DNA. And so, especially when you're in an industry that is male dominated, women in STEM, women in potentially in this industry, it feels like you have it more because men around you may be excelling more because it's the way society has elevated them. We're trying to get better, right, about giving more opportunities to BIPOC people, to women, to people with different abilities, to people with all those kinds of things. So I think that's why. That's my personal, I haven't done like a scientific, research paper on it. You can turn natural genius into an asset. Work with me in my workshop, Elizabeth. November 15th is when it starts. Is there in your experience, is there a specific type that's most difficult to conquer and combat? No, Andrew, it's not. Once we get to the root, it opens up a world, like Jennifer said. It's like going, if you ever watch The Wizard of Oz, where it goes from colored or black and white to color, it's like, all of a sudden everything comes through. There goes my camera again. Thanks, Zoom. Love ya. Let's see. Finally, I feel the imposter in places. Okay, and there it goes again. Thanks, Zoom. One more time. I feel the imposter syndrome places blame into the individual without considering, yes, some microaggressions from the environment that causes us, yes. Yes, during my MBA class with a team of only men, I was not the only woman. Absolutely. And I agree, which is why I say, and it's that environmental phenomenon, which is why I say it's not about, it's a phenomenon. Everybody has it. We sabotage ourselves this way. Every human at any point in time can feel at the effect of something. So let's get to the source of it, disrupt it, so that you can have agency and power even in that room of men. Look, I have worked in male-dominated industries for a long time. And people would say to me, someone said one time, well, there wasn't a seat at the table. I would use my feminine charm to get there. And I was like, I wouldn't. I'd be like, buddy, move over. My chair's coming in. I'm sitting down. I have a right to be here. So I get that those microaggressions in the male-dominated environment, how do we give you agency and voice to say what you're saying doesn't work? And actually be direct and empathetic and leave someone's humanity intact and school them about that. I'm with you. Excellent point. Yep. Yeah. Thanks to everybody for sharing today. Let me go ahead and advance one last slide, Kathy, because we are out of time. So here's a couple. I think this is going to be somewhere. I believe we're putting this out here's the quiz. If you haven't taken it, and many of you have. Here's the bit.ly link for the Facebook group, the bit.ly link for the workshop. I believe we're going to put it somewhere. So that you can get access to it or take a screenshot of that and go for it. And that, you can just advance to the next slide. Thank you. Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you, Jen. I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker as well. So Elizabeth Bachman. I've also known Elizabeth for several months now and had a wonderful experience getting to know her and working with her as well. So I think her presentation today is going to be very beneficial to everyone in the call today. She's the go-to person for advanced level training in speaking, presentation skills, sales, and leadership. With a lifetime spent perfecting the art of presenting, she helps high-level clients master a message that brings the funding they need, the allies they want, and the recognition they deserve. A sought-after speaker and strategist in Silicon Valley, as well as nationally and internationally, Elizabeth works with leaders and influencers who need to become concise and compelling presenters. She helps them present as smart, down-to-earth, loose, friendly, and even funny, and still be taken seriously. She hosts a podcast called Speakers Who Get Results. Elizabeth interviews experts from around the world on presentation skills, leadership and visibility, as well as communication challenges that range from presenting internationally to gender misunderstandings. In more than 50 operas around the world, Elizabeth has directed such luminaries as Luciano Pavarotti, hope I pronounced that right, and Placido Domingo, giving her a wealth of tools to help business professionals become respected presenters. Fluent in 5 languages, she's adept at working with presenters from many countries, bringing her global experience to her clients. And without further ado, Elizabeth will be talking about strategic speaking for results when you want to make a difference, not just a point. Elizabeth?
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm delighted to do this. I'm going to start my little timer here. I navigated away from it. There. Okay. So I want to make sure that there is time for question and answer. What we are talking about today in terms of how do you apply what you've learned from Jen Coken, basically. So Jen Coken's doing the mindset part, and I talk about how do you actually apply it in order to not feel invisible. So I'm going to share my screen and pray that it works. And great, and we'll freeze that.
Don't really understand what your problem is trying to solve for.
Oh.
Need to speak to
Somebody's talking. Okay, if you'd all please mute, that would be great. Let me start out with telling you about a client I had. Now, this was someone who was very experienced. He was very well known. He knew what he did, but he was still worried. He had a big presentation coming up, and he thought, ugh, are they going to still like me? Can I still do it? Basically, his imposter syndrome was up in a major way. And so I said to him, well, let's practice. And he said, oh, no, I've got so much to do. I've got meetings. I'm working nonstop. I'll just wing it. And so I said, well, that's if you insist. And so he waited, and he worried, and he worried, and he waited until finally, the night before the presentation was due, he called me up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Thank you very much. He called me up at 3 o'clock in the morning because he couldn't sleep, so why should I? And he called up and he said, I cannot do this alone. I need your help. We met the next day, and since the presentation was that night, I just gave him 3 things to do. 2 of them had to do with the way he was delivering the material, and the third was a physical thing he was doing that was sabotaging him that he didn't actually realize. And that night, I got to watch him walk out in front of a full house of people and be brilliant. He was great. He did everything right. The audience loved him, and they rose to their feet in a standing ovation. I was standing at the side, and I have to tell you that the expression on his face as he took in their applause made me smile so hard my cheeks hurt. This is why I do what I do. That client was Lieutenant Pavarotti, singing the role of Radames in Aida at the Metropolitan Opera. So as you heard, I was an international opera director for over 30 years. I ran an opera company for 11 of those years. I've spent over 10 years training business presenters. I have the international podcast, Speakers Who Get Results, and I should point out, I have to do this at the end, I'll point out that today's episode, it's live today, is with Susan Walsh. So we timed it so that we could have her on there. You can find that if someone has time to go to elizabethbachman.com/podcast and post the link, that would be great. And I also talk about the visible and valued masterminds, which are where I work with groups. I do this within companies, and I also do this with women who are who are peers, but in different organizations, where not only do you work on becoming visible within your company and within your industry, you learn how to raise your value and show up as somebody who's really worth being promoted or being hired or being followed. And I'm really only here because I have made all the mistakes myself. So I'd like to ask you to write in the chat, please. Why did you tune in? Why are you actually listening to this particular talk? What is it about this talk that intrigued you? And as we're doing that, I will ask Jennifer to read some of the answers as they come in. Jennifer, what kind of answers are we getting?
Nothing yet.
Okay. I know sometimes people tune in because they're not listened to in that work, or they're being talked over. Some people figure out that are waiting to be recognized for their value and find that they are taken for granted. I work with a lot of problem solvers, actually, people who are women who are really good at solving problems. So their department runs just fine. Thank you very much. That means that they're taken for granted. They don't have to worry about Jennifer's department. So we'll worry about the department that's making all the noise. And then they see the the promotions going to louder, flashier people? I see now we have some answers, Jennifer.
Yes, absolutely. So Jen mentioned that she wants to make an impact with others and can always be more effective. Grace mentioned her position requires a presentation to C-suite, and she's frequently the only woman in the room. I can definitely resonate with that. Anu wants to be more effective in the work environment. Andrew mentioned just loving to learn about how to be a better presenter and better speaker. Larissa wants to raise up her peers and learn a thing or 10.
Yay.
Oh, we have several more. Now you'd like me to read.
Great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And I do hope we're going to be sending out the chat, because later on I'm going to be asking you to enter some things that might be useful for each other. My intention today is to show you how to get the recognition you deserve, how to aim towards thought leadership, and how to actually do how to actually get it done. Because it's really easy to listen to workshops like this and say, wow, I'm going to take action, I'm going to do all of this. But actually taking action is, I don't know about you, that's always a challenge for me. So presenting equals credibility, but for many people, women especially, your expertise isn't valued. Or presenting equals credibility, but you don't know where to speak in order to get the results you want, which is actually an art in and of itself. Or you're not being heard, as we mentioned earlier. I learned about this because I've been in the communication business since I first walked on stage at the age of 5. And afterwards, I heard my mom say that I was the best goddamn bunny rabbit ever to grace the stage of the Hillside School. And I was totally hooked. I went from acting to directing opera singers, to running an opera company. And now I leverage all that I've learned working with business presenters, especially high-level women who are hitting a glass ceiling. That's a sort of mini specialty of mine. And my overall mission is really to get more women's voices out there. So let's talk a little bit about, in order to get the result that you need through your strategic speaking, why is this not going? Let's see, there we go. You need the right strategy. You need a script that will get you the results you need. And of course, your delivery style is very important, how you show up in the room. This all melds together. You do sort of have to start with strategy and then go to script and then go to style, but it all feeds in amongst each other. The one thing that is consistent to all of it is you. Being you and being the wonderful you that you want to be, showing people who you really are, that's the key to getting the results that you want. Why does it matter? To be transparent, it does take some work. Like anything worth doing, you have to practice. You have to learn it, you have to practice. But in order to do this, the more you are a great speaker, the more you are an interesting speaker, the more people will pay attention, listen to you, and recognize that you have something to share. It also matters. I loved whoever it was who said she wanted to raise up other women. The more we see women out there, the more it will not be an exception. In the opera business, I was one of the early wave of female directors. I wasn't in the absolute first wave, but I was in the next wave that came along after the wall had been broken down, but it was still really unusual to have a woman in a boss position, basically, because as the director works with the conductor and the producer, and you are running things. And I have my own conversation about glass ceilings, which I won't get into here, but I certainly had plenty of bruises on my head with glass ceilings. And that's why I started my own company. I hope some of you had a chance to listen to or read the podcast, Do You Feel Invisible? The intention for sending this to you in advance was so that you could go through these concepts and come armed with questions. The first question about strategy is, who needs to hear you? So in your company, who needs to hear you and what do you want them to do once they are listening to you? And please, let's write this in the chat. This is one of the things that's going to be really useful to look at later when we share the chat. And Jennifer, as soon as we have some answers, let's find out, who do you speak to who needs to be listening? And what do you want them to do?
While everybody's thinking, I can share my own perspective. Who needs to hear me? I'd say there's quite a few audiences, but leadership is one that I often want to hear me about what I'm trying to achieve in the organization and how I'm helping to uplift my peers within the organization. Larissa wants her clients to hear her and want them to be pleased. Tulip mentioned directors and taking accountability. Deborah wants her boss to hear her, and she wants to get leadership from him. Rose mentioned various levels of the organization: leadership, stakeholders, users, team members. Anu is taking on a new project, and she doesn't have experience. She has a whole new set of ideas and wants senior management to listen to her seriously.
Okay, so you can keep on entering while I keep on talking, but I have another question for you. What do they need to believe about you in order to take you seriously? And of course, do they actually believe that? If you tuned in to something that says, do you feel invisible? And if you're feeling invisible, then what is it that they need to believe about you they maybe don't believe now? And I have to say that with the women I talk to, 8 out of 10 of the women that I talk to tell me that they have a seat at the table, but they still aren't being listened to. And there are many and many, many reasons for that. So I've done 1.5 years, almost 2 years of podcast episodes about why the men aren't listening, or why women aren't being listened to.
Anu wants the ability to deliver for this project. Larissa mentioned the need to believe they are getting value. Sarah wants them to believe that she cares. Kate mentions that she is equally as capable as they are perceived to be.
Thank you, Kate. Yes.
And Deborah just wants them to know she has something to offer.
Okay. All right. So keep that in mind, who you speak to, because we're going to ask you about that later. The first solution to this is match your message to the room. And by that, and write that down, match your message to the room. That means if you're talking to different audiences, such as upper management or your team or stakeholders, what is it that they want? What do they want to know? And how can you deliver what you're telling them in a way that they will actually get it? You've got to take into mind who's listening and what's important to them. You know, I mean, if you're talking to the board of trustees, they want to hear different things from if you're talking to the finance department, for instance. You know, bear in mind who you're listening to. I actually think of it as rule number 1, make it about them. My client, Janet, was one of those problem solvers I talked about. She was really good at solving problems. She was a senior director at a tech company, international. And the problem was that they kept giving her problems to solve without recognition, without a raise. She would solve it and they say, oh, great, thanks, Janet. And she was being taken for granted. So she called me up and she said, I'm done. I'm fed up with this. They've given me this new project to do. and I know how to solve it. It's a problem that's going to affect the entire company. I have to work across all the platforms. I can solve it, but I'm tired of doing this and not being rewarded for it. So we worked out a strategy. And the strategy was that she laid out her plan, and she went to every member of the C-level, from the CEO to the CRO, the CMO, all of them. Each one, she would lay out her strategy. This is my strategic thinking, she said. So if you tell them you're a strategic thinker, start dropping that word. That's the sort of that's what you need to be in order to be at the upper level of a company. You can't just be a good manager. You have to be a strategic thinker. So she would go and she said, this is my strategic thinking. And she would outline the parts of the plan that each one would respond to. With the CFO, it was the numbers. With the CMO, it was the publicity, etc. And then she had something to ask them that would enroll them into being on her side. Sometimes it was, you're so much better at this. I would like your help on this. Sometimes it was, I know you care about these figures. Here's how this plan will do that, etc. So she talked to each one individually, tailoring her strategy for each person. And they were so excited that at the next executive meeting, they created a new vice president position for her. So she was able to solve the problem with the plan she already had, but she got the recognition, she got the raise, and she got the, she really got the plan and the position that she wanted. For your script, here's part 2. As you are, as we did with Janet, this is strategy and script together, use what I call strategic empathy, which is to put yourself into the shoes of your listeners. What is it that they care about? And how can you phrase it in a way that they can hear you? Here's a pro tip. Who are your allies? One of the things that I love to do is to help, especially women, develop your allies. That's why I have these wonderful lionesses over here, so that, because they're the ones who go out and do the hunting, where the lions just sort of sit there and look handsome with, enjoy their hair. So who are your allies? This is one of the things that we work on with masterminds a lot, especially for women. I find that having a cohort, having a team, having a posse makes it easier to move forward. So recruiting your allies can be incredibly useful. And if anybody has questions about that afterwards, I can go on to that in more detail. So the next solution is not only what are you going to say, but why do they care? One of the mistakes that I see people make all the time is they'll do too much how, not enough why. And this is sales 101, enrollment 101. If you want to, you're going to, anytime you're trying to convince something to do something, you're selling the idea. And sales 101 is sell the benefits, not the feature, sell the sizzle, not the steak. And yet, if you're the expert, if you're really good at what you do, it's really easy to go off on a tangent and tell them too much of the what and the how, and not why does it matter. Even if you're doing a report, an internal report, where you are telling people what your team is doing and how it's going to work, don't forget the why we should care. What's the benefit? Here's another pro tip. This is where a lot of women, not just women, but where a lot of people really find trouble in communicating. You could think of people dividing into two parts. You're either single focused, You get lots done, you work on one thing at a time and you're single focused, or you're multi-focused, which is able to notice many things. Now, many people call this masculine, single focus is masculine and multi-focused is feminine, and indeed that is the majority. However, I know plenty of women who can be very single focused when they're on a task. I'm very single focused when I'm on a task. And I know plenty of men who are multi-focused. The key is to value them both. If you are a single focused person, you should recognize that the value of the multi-focused person is they're the ones who are going to notice if you're launching a new task, for instance, we're going to create this new piece of software, whatever. It's the multi-focused people who are going to say, hey, we should bring in Sue and Claudia down the hall because they have something to answer. Or it's the multi-focused people who will say, has anybody actually asked the client if they want this before we invest all this time and money? Multi-focused people, which is mostly women, and this is one of the things where women get in trouble all the time. Multi-focused people tend to talk about lots of things at once. And the single-focused people really can only hear one idea at a time. Those of you who are in heterosexual marriages or partnerships, ladies, you may notice that you're trying to talk to the men and they can't understand you. They're not paying attention or they don't hear you. It's because they're single focused. They're focused on one thing. And if you come in and try to talk about 3 or 4 things at once, they're not going to get it. The key is to have, if you're multi-focused, this is where you want to come in with the bullet points. And you have sub-bullets in your back pocket if you need them, if there's a question, but you want to speak concise and clear, bearing in mind that the single focused people are only going to hear one thing at a time. If they know why it matters and what you're going to talk to them about, they're more likely to listen, understand, and pay attention. The good thing about single focused people is when you do have their attention, you have all their attention. You just have to make sure that you are taking that into account as you are presenting. And this is a lot of what I help my clients with. The third part is the style, your delivery style, how you show up. And as Jen was talking about, are you sabotaging yourself? Maybe you're one of those people who, if you're a perfectionist, you're not going to go forward unless it's all perfect. Or the natural genius, as Jen Coken was saying, where if it's not easy, you're not going to step forward. I know that I waited for years to be recognized for my good work. And until I finally learned that I actually had to promote myself in a way that people could hear and understand, and promote myself to the right people before I could move forward. That's one of the reasons why I have so many bruises on my skull from the glass ceiling, because I wasn't promoting myself right. I thought that just being really good at my job was going to be enough. And unfortunately, it isn't. The other way that people sabotage themselves, is with nerves. So if you are nervous about giving a presentation, sometimes that stops women from raising their hands. I talk to producers and conference organizers from around the world, and pretty consistently, unless it's a women's conference, you'll see that 5% of the presenters are female and the other 95% are male. And when I say, why don't you have more women? The answer most of the time is we'd love to have more women, but the women wait until it's perfect. The women's, as Jen was saying earlier, the women say, oh, I've only got 98% of it. Let me do this last 2% and then I'll be ready. Come back next year. That sort of thing. I don't know if any of you recognize this feeling. When you are sabotaging yourself in terms of your delivery style is often if you're nervous. So think for a moment, if you've ever seen a presenter step forward and their voice gets kind of soft and monotone, and maybe the shoulders are coming up around their ears, and they're nervous. You can tell that they're nervous. And maybe you even been that person. This is where the imposter syndrome is talking in your head so much that you can't actually focus on the people you're talking to because the voices in your head are so loud. And I don't know about you guys, but for me, the voices in my head, I don't have one or two, I have a whole choir. And when the choir is singing in my ear, it's really hard to hear. Here's a solution. Think about your listeners as guests at your party. Your party, your guest, you've invited them into your space, which means that you're in charge and you're going to offer them something delicious, which is your expertise. If you think of them, think before you're walking into that meeting of, welcome to my party. I have something wonderful for you. Remember that you are the gift. If you're in there asking for a donation for your nonprofit, it is a gift to them to be able to support your cause. If you're asking for a sale, assuming that you believe in what you're promoting, then it's a gift. Your information, giving your information to upper management is a gift to them. They wouldn't be there if they didn't want to hear you. And again, if anybody is having issues with this, you can reach out and contact me. This is something that we work on a lot with my clients. However, that's not all. Don't think that you've got it all now, because the other piece is thought leadership. You can make great strides. I've made great strides with many of my clients in being listened to and recognized within your company. However, it only lasts so long because it's human nature. If you see somebody every day, if you talk to somebody every day, you're not going to take them as seriously. So you need to get out and speak outside the company. Because then when Claudia gives a speech and then make sure that she shares the feedback with the rest of her company, the other company says, wow, Claudia gave a speech? Oh, I didn't know Claudia knew that. So if you're out there, this is strategy and script. Start making a name for yourself as the expert in X or Y or Z. Make a name for yourself as the person who knows the most about whatever your theme is. And the question again is how? Where is your audience? And at this point, I'm going to stop my share and go into it. I'm going to invite Jennifer here to speak to us. So Jennifer, before we go on, have we got any questions in the chat so far?
No questions, some nice comments, but no questions that I see.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you if you'd be willing to be a guinea pig here for a minute.
Always.
Always, okay. What is the problem that you solve? What is the thing that you're really good about?
Well, I think, for this particular topic, I'd like to cover the one angle that I enjoy speaking to the most, which is supplier diversity programs, helping clients to develop supplier diversity programs.
Okay, who needs to hear that? Who is it who's going to pay you to develop a supplier diversity program for them?
Well, oftentimes it's going to be the senior leadership at an organization. Now, that doesn't mean who I'm speaking to. What I hear from more of the frontline, more, procurement team, the diversity and inclusion team, the individuals that want it. And, they're not always the ones that have the budget or the decision makers to get the movement that they'd like to see.
Yes. Okay. So what you really want to do is get to senior leadership. What sorts of groups would they be at? Where would they be that you might be able to speak and they would hear you?
So,
and actually, while we're talking about this, so you've now heard what Jennifer's looking for. If anybody has ideas for her, put them in the chat. If you know of any conferences or groups or podcasts she could speak on, please enter that in the chat. So Jennifer, where would they be?
I would say, how about ISM National 2022? Yep.
Okay.
Little plug there, but yes.
And but what else besides ISM? Let's not wait till 2022.
ProcureCon, yes, Julianne, good point. There's a lot of different segments of ProcureCon. They do very niche focus, and then they have broader opportunities as well. I'd say, more of the outlets would be like, off the top of my head, Spend Matters, Art of Procurement. These are some great angles. Even Core-centric, we do a lot of Core-centric conversations to speak on topics like this as well.
Are there any allied groups that you could speak to where maybe they're not specifically there to listen about supplier diversity, but you can say why supplier diversity will increase your ROI, for instance?
I think possibly looking for other angles that are not necessarily supplier focused, but more diversity and inclusion on the broader scale. So I'm sure there's a lot of events and topics around just workforce inclusion, where oftentimes I'm using that as an angle to say, if you're already doing it throughout your culture and within your employees and whatnot, why aren't you doing it in your supply chain? And it starts to kind of spread that message more broadly.
Okay. And then the thing is, the thing is for you is what is your special sauce that makes it interesting? This is also where it would be interesting for you to find podcasts that your ideal listeners might be listening to. And of course, even if they're not listening to the podcast, you could publicize that you've been on this podcast and they should listen to this particular topic.
Right.
Employee resource group, says Lorinda, Procurement Foundry, Chambers of Commerce, absolutely. It's all about looking a little bit below the surface, but specific things. P-Talk with Sarah Scudder. Thank you all. So Jennifer, does that give you some ideas?
It does. Definitely didn't think about some of those angles, right?
And here's another way of thinking about this is, who are other speakers who speak about to the same market, but maybe not about that exact subject? Then you can always stalk them on the internet and see where they are speaking. Where are the other speakers? Anybody who's doing women's leadership, if you follow Jen Coken or me, you can see the various places that we speak and see if that would be a place for you. So WeBank, I was a member of for quite a while. So this is a way you can think about it. And one of the great ways, any other suggestions? Thoughts with Coffee podcast. Okay, Jennifer, you're going to have to save this chat. Okay, and then we'll talk later about how we get you on these podcasts. Let me go back to sharing here.
Hey,
So
Elizabeth,
for,
there actually was one question that somebody
yes,
had,
please.
which
Go ahead.
was, sorry, Andrew says, generally is self-deprecating humor a form of sabotage or a tool to break the ice?
It is a tool to break the ice in America and in Europe. In China, if I said I've done all these things and I've made all the mistakes myself, that's there to break the ice. I would not do that to a Chinese audience because the reaction is likely to be, why should we listen to her? She's made mistakes. So again, it goes back to who's your listener. But self-deprecating humor is great. Any kind of humor is great. If you think about where is your audience and how to get there. One of the things that's also very helpful is to get together with a group of friends and brainstorm. Sit down and brainstorm. A really good way of doing this is to meet with these friends every 2 weeks. Brainstorm about places they could speak, and then sit down and use that time to apply, send out the applications. So that's another good way to do it. That's a big part of what we do in the mastermind groups, the visible and valued masterminds, is brainstorm for each other and then create accountability days when we're actually out there doing the applications. If you're not sure what you want to talk about, then a good way to do this is, again, get together with your friends and think about what annoys you in your interest. What's your pet peeve? What are the things you see that really make you go, it's, I wish it weren't this way. And get together with some friends. Bottle of wine is helpful, or whatever your beverage of choice, and complain. I'm giving you permission to complain. Complain for for about an hour. Write down the ideas, and then when you see the problems, identify the problems. What could you say towards solving them? You may not actually have a solution. Maybe what you're doing is raising more questions, but that is a good way to figure out what your ideas and your themes are. The importance for all of this is there's a short-term strategy for being heard within your company and the long-term strategy of building your personal brand and maybe even setting yourself up as a thought leader within your community, within your industry. You've got to be working on them both at the same time. So to review, this isn't something that happens overnight. I wish it were. I mean, if I had an elixir that I could sell, I'd be a bazillionaire. But it's a process. Can't patch it on. You have to do this. So think about, who are your allies? Take a moment and just write down, who could your allies be in order to help you be heard? Do you think that you're single-focused or multi-focused? And if so, what can you do to address the people who are who think differently? And where might you be sabotaging yourself, either by showing your nerves or just not raising your hand? And now my question for you is, what is one thing that you could implement by, let's say, the end of next week? And I'm going to ask you to write that in the chat. And if you can, see who's going to hold you accountable. So we'll put those in the chat. I'm not going to read them out loud. I'm going to leave this for you for later. And then those of you who know each other, you can reach out and have someone else hold you accountable. What is one thing that you can implement by the end of next week? That's the end of the formal part. If you have more questions, if you haven't already taken the quiz, you can go to speakforresultsquiz.com. I get a copy of your results, and if you are curious, you can have a free 45-minute session with me to discuss your assessment results. So there's a link to my calendar there, and you can just click on the link, get that. Or if you just want some suggestions, I have a series of very short speaker tips that you can click on to get a copy. So I want to thank you all for having me here. And I just leave you with one more thought. Anytime you are speaking to get a result, to move people to action, that is a sales speech. And sales is like sex. Nothing happens till somebody gets excited. Thank you so much.
Team.
Thank you very much.
As the committee started to uncover all of the good works from Tony's Kitchen, deciding on this year's spotlight for the Women in Leadership Conference came easy. Ann Mernon, director of Tony's Kitchen, joins us today to share how Tony's has grown from a small soup kitchen providing one hot meal 3 days a week to serving over 1 million meals so far this year. Prior to serving Tony's, Ann was a management consultant with a specialty in organizational restructuring and process design work. Shortages in higher costs and incalculable lead times run much deeper than the lack of semiconductors and sneakers in the market. Food insecurity hits closer to home than many of you even know. Please welcome Ann to share some of Tony's successes and challenges and how its supply chain issues are being met and overcome. Ann, welcome.
Always forget to unmute. Thank you all. I'm so delighted to be here with you and to have this opportunity to share with you a little bit of the work of Tony's Kitchen. I'm just gonna share my screen and we can get started. So as Larissa mentioned, Tony's Kitchen is a food ministry of St. Luke's Church in Montclair, New Jersey. And we were started almost 40 years ago as a 3-day-a-week soup kitchen. The kitchen was started because some women at the church noticed during the Lenten season, which is a season of reflection, that there were people in our community that were hungry, often without housing, and they needed a place to gather. And so Tony's Kitchen became that place. And for the first, say, 30 years of its existence, it met that need very consistently with a hot meal 3 days a week served at tables in our dining room. About 10 years ago, we began to look around the community and see that there were other types of food need that were not being met by a soup kitchen. So a soup kitchen is a very appropriate solution for people without housing and that have a need to gather around a table and have a hot meal. But it might not be an appropriate solution for a family with young children, for adults doing irregular shift work, for seniors that are unable to come out. So we began to look at how can we solve some of the issues around hunger for those populations. So we maintained our soup kitchen. We expanded it actually to additional days. But we also looked at who in our community was already serving families that were low income or seniors. And we began to establish partnerships with them. So we built these partnerships by embedding food, healthy food, in after-school programs, in senior gatherings, in tutoring programs, mentoring programs, English as a second language programs. Anywhere low-income populations would gather, we wanted to make sure that there was healthy food in that setting. And also they had the availability of healthy food to go home with them. So our kitchen expanded. We really built up our volunteer staff. We also built up our food sourcing from local markets, from farmers, from CSAs, and from local donors. And then we built up a network of about 50 local organizations, from the Y to mentoring programs, any kind of program where kids or families or seniors were gathering, and made sure that there was healthy food there, or healthy food available to them to then take home with them. So just prior to the pandemic, we had already gone through a huge shift in our organization, from serving about 7,000 or 8,000 meals a year to just about 250,000, 240,000 in 2019. And then the pandemic hit. So the pandemic changed everything for us. We could no longer invite people into our dining room for a nice meal. All of our partners were shut down overnight. So our distribution method was gone. But we also knew that we were in this moment of incredible high need, much of it unanticipated. And so how do we confront that need? How do we meet the need while also not having any of the usual tools available to us? So our first step was we partnered with local schools, because the governor in New Jersey had mandated that all the schools needed to provide free and reduced price lunch at no cost to anyone who asked for it. So we knew that some of the families with children would be going to the schools for these outdoor distributions of lunch. So we partnered with our schools in 3 communities to make sure that when families were coming for lunch, they were also getting groceries. We also then set up a pantry when we had never run a traditional food pantry previously. But we overnight created a pantry, and we created it such that the hours were very extensive. So the hours were from 9 to 5, 7 days a week in the early days of this. And we did that because you probably saw during the pandemic, there was so much food need that the lines for food distributions were huge. And that's a really hard thing for someone to get in a line and ask for food. So our goal was to make it very easy for people to access food while also not losing their dignity in the process. As things unfolded, we also realized we needed to be back out in the community more, even though our partners were closed down. So we created a food truck. We launched that in February of this past year, where we would go out into the community. And our thought was primarily to connect with homeless individuals. But what we were finding was that we were also reaching a lot of families where there were people working shift work that was very irregular. Also people who had cognitive or health issues in the adult community and family, where it was very hard for them to plug into a food network. And also obviously our seniors. So we also built 2 large distribution home delivery networks. One was for seniors and the other for families. So as we would identify individuals in the community or families in the community that really needed home delivery, we would add them to the network. So now that network is probably about 650 seniors. Seniors were very hard hit. And then our families were building slowly. We're probably up to about 100 families getting home deliveries, in addition to those that we serve in other ways. So last year was a very busy year. We had to rebuild our supply network. We were very fortunate to have a broad number of suppliers, and that helped a lot. We were also, we had a very large and active volunteer community who, honestly, I'm just overwhelmed by what they did, and especially in those early days of the pandemic, in terms of connecting us with new food sources and jumping into where there were supply chain issues that we could take advantage of. And then we also did an enormous purchase the first week that we were shut down. And we basically took all the tables out of our dining room. We created a Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. I'm sorry. Can you hear me okay?
You're good.
I didn't realize my phone was coming in. So, and I've lost the video on this. Hold on a second. All right, I can't see the Zoom screen anymore, so I'm not sure how to. So sorry. Okay, here we go. I'm very sorry about this. Okay, so I can't see. Do you have my presentation up?
No, we don't see your screen right now, but you can probably see
Okay,
what
I'm
you
so
need to do to
sorry.
pull it back up. No worries. This happened to
Okay,
me
so
first
let
thing
me.
this morning.
Okay.
That same thing.
How is that? Is that good?
I don't
Can
see
you
your
see it
screen.
now?
No.
Okay. I'm gonna try this again.
I can share if you want me to.
All right, we
Okay,
can see
there we
your
go.
screen. Okay, now we see your presentation.
Okay, I'm so sorry about that.
Okay.
So this was, you know, during the pandemic, it was really building an entire new organization very quickly. And the things that we had to draw on in doing that were a really strong volunteer crew who stayed with us during the pandemic, even in those early days, and a very creative team to build new programs quickly and also to source food quickly. So by the end of last year, we had gone from 240,000 meals to just over 1 million. And then of course we have where we are now. So where we are now is a really great place where we've learned a lot during the pandemic about how to really meet the community that we had been serving prior to the pandemic, as well as new families that have needs, but also a lot of people who were left out of the food network. So what we're doing now is really integrating the programs that we built during the pandemic. So our core food pantry, our soup kitchen, our food truck, and all of our delivery that we do, with the really strong programs of our community partners, of which we have about 50 who are all reopening now. So they also are acting as food distributors in essence by providing healthy food in their programs, and also by helping connect families who need more substantial relief with the network of programs that we have, whether it's home delivery, the on-site choice pantry, or food truck. We are on target this year to provide about 1.5 million meals. So these are all of our various programs: our delivery, our healthy backpack program, which is healthy groceries in a backpack for young children, our many community partners, our Summer Love program, which is for summer camps. We work with local doctors who write prescriptions for people to have nutritious food. And then this is a new program that we're building called Healthy Corners, which is to have healthy food at bodegas and other little shops in low-income areas. So we'll be testing these programs. We'll be using these programs that have been tested to really build out the network over the next couple of years. And our goal, and then we think it's very realistic, is just to end hunger completely and food insecurity in the 3 communities that we serve. We'll be doing a large capital project to expand our space to handle all of our new needs for space. And then we expect within the next few years to really be able to end hunger in the 3 communities we serve. Do you have any questions for me?
Hi, and there is a question from
Sure.
Anu. Do you include allergy-friendly food donations as well? Do you see a demand for it?
Yes. So I mentioned about 650 home deliveries to seniors. In there, we have not so much allergy issues, although we have a few gluten-free, but we also have special health needs. Seniors get groceries and they get meals prepared in our kitchen. So those are done specifically for those seniors, those special requests. And then our pantry is set up as a choice pantry, so people can shop the pantry. So they're really picking what is appropriate to their family. So it's a much more effective use of our food resources, and it's much more respectful to what their food needs are. So we do try and work with allergies and special diets.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions in the chat? Anybody else? All right, Anne, thank you so much for being
our next speaker, Kim Brown from GSK. So Kim Brown is GSK's Vice President of Procurement for Facilities, Capital, and Logistics. GSK is one of the world's premier pharmaceutical companies with revenues exceeding $40 billion in 2020. She's responsible for developing and implementing the global procurement strategy for categories critical to the success of GSK's supply chain. Prior to GSK, Kim held senior executive roles in procurement at Dell Technologies, Toys R Us, the Reynolds and Reynolds Company, and GE. Kim is an ardent supporter of diversity in business. She actively participates in several industry associations, including Institute of Supply Management, thank you, and Women's Business Enterprise National Council. Today, Kim will share some of the challenges GSK has faced over the last 18 months while navigating the pandemic, how GSK has addressed those challenges, and several valuable lessons they have learned along the way. Thank you, Kim. Floor is yours.
Thanks, Susie, and good afternoon to everybody. I thought I'd start today with a quick look back to the fall of 2019. At that time, I'd been with GSK a little over a year. I had just filled the last open role on my leadership team. We had brand new category strategies in place that enabled us to exceed our 2019 goals and objectives, while providing a strong foundation for another strong year of performance in 2020. We could forecast, we could budget, we could plan, and we could have products and services delivered in a very predictable and timely fashion. I spent most days in the office, either in North Carolina or in London, and I was traveling enough at that point to have earned high-level statuses on both airlines and hotel chains. So in summary, my work life was really, really good. And then COVID hit, and our whole world changed dramatically. What I want to share with you today are some of the challenges that I'm facing at GSK, most of which will likely sound familiar to you. Then I'm going to talk about how we've adapted to this strange new world and some of the lessons we've learned along the way. And finally, at the end of my talk, I'll open the floor up for your questions and comments. At that time, feel free to either raise your hand or enter them into the Zoom chat box. I really look forward to hearing how you and your companies have survived this crazy COVID world. So let's start with the challenges. First, personal protective equipment, PPE. Prior to COVID, things like masks, gloves, and hand sanitizer were considered simple supply items. They were cheap, they were easy to get, and we never ran out. However, during the pandemic, PPE became so scarce that it actually threatened our ability to operate. Because without it, we couldn't keep our manufacturing sites open to produce GSK's life-saving medicines. To address this situation, We scheduled daily meetings and constantly monitored inventory to ensure we had a steady flow of PPE coming into our sites around the world. Like many of you, I had the same challenge trying to find PPE for my own personal use. So I ended up searching Amazon on a daily basis. I remember getting so excited when I was finally able to place an order for masks, as we were virtually stuck in the house until they came. Who knew that finding masks would be such a big thrill? The second challenge was the unprecedented reduction of world trade at the onset of COVID that stranded shipping containers in all the wrong locations. And this is a huge problem even today. As an example, right now there are over 100 massive cargo ships containing over 500,000 containers of products of every single nature on behalf of thousands of companies that are currently sitting in the ocean off the coast of Southern California, just waiting to be unloaded. And they've been sitting there for a while. And to make matters worse, once those ships finally do come into port, there aren't enough truck drivers to get them to their destination. In fact, we're currently estimating that in the US, we are short over 60,000 truck drivers. The combinations of those two challenges have resulted in higher rates and longer lead times, causing delivery delays and the need for all of us to resort to build extra inventory as a way to avoid shortages. The third and final challenge is the shift to remote working. This was a huge change for many of us, myself included, who used to go into the office every day. Working remotely has raised multiple challenges, such as dealing with limited home bandwidth and finding a suitable place to work from. In addition, our children's remote learning and the demands placed on the internet by their video game playing also limited our ability to operate in a smooth and seamless fashion. All combined, these challenges have caused us to dramatically rethink the way we operate and required us in many cases to experiment with and implement entirely new ways of conducting business. That wise old sage, Fred Rogers of Mr. Rogers fame, and frankly, who doesn't love Mr. Rogers, summed up the way we need to think about challenges when he said, often when you think you're at the end of something, you're at the beginning of something else. We're all currently at the crossroads that's been created by COVID. So let me share a few of the lessons we learned at GSK, along with the steps we've taken to mitigate those challenges. Lesson 1, learn to learn. Let me explain what I mean by that with a quick story. Anne Mulcahy, the former CEO of Xerox, says the best lesson she learned in her business life is what she describes as the cow in the ditch. In business, you will face challenges and obstacles, and sometimes your cow, or in other words, your business, will go into the ditch. So what do you do when that happens? 3 things. First, get the cow out of the ditch. In other words, fix the problem. Second, find out why the cow went into the ditch. In essence, what happened? And third, and most important, implement precautions to ensure that the cow doesn't go into the ditch again. What do we mean by that? We could perhaps renegotiate contract terms, approve additional suppliers, enhance your forecasting system, or the like. The bottom line is, evaluate carefully what you need to do to fix the problem, because what got you here and the way you've always done it is not going to necessarily get where you want to go in business. Let me give you a timely example of how we course corrected at GSK. Pre-pandemic, we had just executed our logistics strategy for the coming year, finalizing extremely attractive deals that were set to yield tens of millions of dollars in savings in 2020. And then the pandemic blew it all up. Suddenly, Freight rates were dramatically higher than what we had negotiated, and even worse, only valid for short periods of time. That required us to go out to bid semi-annually for ocean freight, quarterly for air freight, and even daily at times if we wanted to take advantage of spot market rates that were quite attractive. So in summary, learn to learn means quite simply, fix it, analyze why, and course correct. If you don't do that, your cow or your business may never get out of the ditch. Second lesson, be creative. Let me give you a couple of examples of situations over the last year and a half that have required creative solutions. I mentioned PPE earlier and how difficult it was to get. But to make matters even worse, even though we were already leveraging more than one distributor globally, those distributors were all buying from the same supplier, who just happened to be located in Wuhan, China. Talk about a big oops. So obviously that strategy wasn't working, and we had to rethink our approach. So we decided to dramatically expand our supply base to include some local and regional suppliers that happen to be located close to our manufacturing sites. And in addition, a few of our suppliers got the creative bug as well and started to manufacture products that were outside of their standard offerings, including hand sanitizer, which turned out to be a really, really big help. Logistics was another area where creativity was essential. Prior to COVID, we mostly shipped via ocean freight. But the difference in cost and shipping between ocean and air continued to get smaller and smaller and smaller. That, coupled with extended lead times and decreased delivery performance, opened the door to alternatives that we would have never considered before, like charter aircraft. And we'd never done that one before. So we had to start from square one and figure out how to do that and how to make it happen. What's it going to cost, etc. And really going outside the box. We decided to partner with another pharmaceutical company, who ironically was a direct competitor of ours, to split the shipping costs so that we could both move our products to satisfy our patients' needs. Think about that for a minute. Can you really imagine sharing costs and collaborating with a direct competitor? That would have never happened before COVID. But we did it, and it worked for both of us. Finally, we had to rethink the way we used and installed equipment in our manufacturing sites. Under normal circumstances, the manufacturer's representatives traveled to the GSK location to both install the equipment and train our employees. However, our sites went into lockdown once COVID hit, and only essential GSK workers were admitted. So we obviously needed to come up with another way to get the machines up and running. So for the first time ever, we decided to install the equipment via video. And we did this by virtually linking the GSK engineers with their supplier counterparts to get the job done. This approach could have been considered pretty risky, given the purchase price of the equipment is often millions of dollars. But it ended up being a viable solution for not only now, but also for the future. At times, we get so caught up in how we do things today that we fail to consider other options. COVID has forced us to rethink everything, unleashing the power of the possible and yielding the creative solutions we so desperately needed. Moving on to lesson 3, be flexible. Like many of you, we thought that the pandemic would be over much faster than it is proven to be. As an example, we had planned to start bringing people back into the office last October. Obviously, we were wrong, as here we are a year later, and very few people are coming to the office on a regular basis. But why is that? It seems that many of us, myself included, have adjusted to working from home and don't feel that need to go into the office on a daily basis. This is where flexibility comes into play. And a good example of that is a program that we have recently rolled out called Performance with Choice. It's a hybrid model that encourages our office-based colleagues to explore how they can work remotely in a way that supports both individual and collective performance, as well as personal well-being. With this model, where and how work happens is going to differ depending on your role, your team requirements, your assignments, and the preferred ways of working. So in other words, we allow GSK employees to work where and when it works for their team, and to work where and when it works for them. It's probably a bit early to fully evaluate the effectiveness of this new approach, and we're still experimenting with some other new ways of working in this crazy new world. But this is just one tool we're leveraging to provide as much flexibility as possible without sacrificing productivity. Like many of you, I haven't been in the office or on a business trip in 19 months. That seems like a very long time. But I've adjusted in many ways to what is my new normal. I happen to live in Las Vegas, which is in the Pacific time zone, and I'm keeping East Coast hours, which means that I'm normally online by 4:30 a.m. every day. That's early. And it was a bit difficult at first, but it's now my norm. And it certainly doesn't hurt that we have a relaxed business attire these days. Finally, lesson 4, social interaction is essential. I think we'd all agree that we have been lost without the digital collaboration tools like Zoom and Teams that are the backbone of our new ways of working. And while we can at least see each other now, it's not the same as it was before, for 2 reasons. 1, a significant percentage of our interactions now come from scheduled meetings. And while you can certainly ping a colleague when you need something, given our perpetually full calendars, it kind of feels rude sometimes to interrupt. And 2, we're in our homes, so we can't grab lunch with our colleagues or friends, or just chat with someone you run into on the way to a meeting or the cafeteria, or even on the way out to the parking lot. So the question is, what do we do to keep morale, camaraderie, and company loyalty going in this virtual environment? A few things that have worked for us include arranging casual virtual coffee meetings during work hours and virtual happy hours at the end of the day. BYOB, of course. This can be a bit tricky given the many time zones involved, but just scheduling time with no specific business agenda has been a big hit. So much so that we even did our Christmas party virtual last year. Included the dreaded wearing of the ugly Christmas sweater, which, by the way, I had to go out and buy something for. I don't think any of us appreciated how important in-person conversations and meetings were until we lost the ability to interact that way. These virtual events have helped towards filling this social gap resulting from remote working and inspired a host of unique and different opportunities for informal and fun activities. This is a good lesson to take forward, is even after the pandemic finally fades away, hopefully soon, we still will never have enough travel budget to visit our global teams as much as we'd like. So mixing in some of these virtual activities with our travel plans can be a really good compromise. In closing, let me leave you with a simple quote from Marie Curie that summarizes my message nicely. Nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more so that we may fear less. Should GSK really have been able to predict the impact that a pandemic would have on our entire business? Frankly, no. I don't think anybody could have done that because none of us have ever experienced anything like this before. COVID has been and continues to be a challenge for all of us. But it'd be a big mistake to think when we look back 12 months from now that the challenges we're facing today and the resolutions we developed to fight those challenges will be the same. That's why we need to continue to learn from our experiences, be as creative and flexible as possible, and most importantly, never underestimate the power of social interaction. Now, I'll be happy to take any questions or hear your ideas. As I mentioned earlier, feel free to either raise your hand or enter them into the Zoom chat box. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. That was great. Maybe I could just start with a question for you.
Sure.
So the 4 lessons were great. And I'm just curious from your perspective, what was the most difficult thing for you personally from that transition of being in the office and living like what we knew as normal to current normal?
Probably the time zone. Like I mentioned, I am 3 hours behind the East Coast and 8 behind the UK, where many of my colleagues are based. So it was a time zone change. Prior to COVID, I had been commuting quite a bit, but I would be spending 3 weeks on average in one of those 2 time zones and 1 week at home. So at first, getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning every day and getting camera ready was kind of a big shock. But I've adapted to it. Like I said, it's been much easier than what I would have intended. And the other thing, I just want to reinforce the point about the Zoom and the Teams. I'd been in a similar situation at a different company a few years ago, where we weren't using video at that time. And I would be spending all day looking at my screen, 8, 10, 12 hours, and wondering why I was so exhausted at the end of that time frame, because I couldn't see anybody. And it's just, you're missing everything, right? So when we started to really go video full time, it was such a huge help. If you're a people person at all, at least we can see each other. It's not as good as being in the same room, but it's better than what it was before. We were just basically talking to our screens. Oh.
Thank you. Maybe while we're waiting for some questions to come in, I can share a lesson learned from my side. I was doing a lot of these virtual meetings as well, and I found, and you mentioned about even being overscheduled, I found that I was so overscheduled that I also forgot, the hallway conversations, and having conversations with, some of my stakeholders and some of my, coworkers. I said, nobody ever picks up the phone and just texts someone and say, hey, do you have 5 minutes to chat? And that became another avenue, because we were on video all the time, every day, to just remember, you could just call someone real quick and ask a question. You don't need to put a 30-minute meeting on someone's calendar.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
it is a little bit more difficult too. One of the things I've had to adjust to too is my assistant has taken to putting breaks into my calendar during the day, just so I have time to take a bio break. I mean, that sounds silly, but you're back to back to back. There's no time between meetings, and it's just I never thought about that before. You just get up and go, and now it's kind of like one after another. You just have to keep it going. So it's very different. And it was funny. One of my colleagues had just went over to the UK just a couple of weeks ago for the first time, and they're like, I got so much done just in those ancillary ad hoc conversations. I could just talk to somebody for 5 minutes and get an answer really quick. And we forget about all that. We're missing all that. So
Yeah. Good.
Hopefully we'll be back in the office soon.
Yeah. So there's a number of questions and comments coming in. So Victor said, I enjoyed your quote from Marie Curie, a true woman in leadership. Anu has a question. How did you manage to ensure that your team was engaged?
So like I said, we really tried to think about how to do that, to pull everybody together. And, as a global team, we're all on different time zones, myself included. So it was really trying to find those opportunities where we could almost got into a mode of over communication. Let's set up those coffee clatches. Let's have a little break at the end of the day. Let's have more frequent team meetings just to kind of make sure that we're all together. You got to keep that camaraderie going. The only way to do that is keeping the communication lines open.
Yeah, that's right. So the next question, similar. What is your key to success when managing a team remotely? Any other comments around that topic?
So in a normal environment, what I would do, and what has really worked well for me, is to really lay out my schedule for the year. Just try and really think about, where is my team located? You know, in my past life, the last company before, I had people in 27 countries. That's a lot. Obviously, I wasn't going to visit all of those in the course of one, even one fiscal year, which just wasn't going to happen. So it's really trying to lay all that out, where I needed to go this year, where I could go next year, someplace I needed to go more than once in a calendar year, just trying to lay all that out. And then really think about, when I'm doing a town hall or et cetera, trying to keep that in mind. So one of my tips was, I used to do multiple town hall sessions. So I would run one at one time to get this part of the world in, and then run another one to get that part of the world in, because you want to make it as convenient as possible. I have a colleague on our team who lives in Singapore, and the first question I always ask her is, what time is it, Charmaine? She'll be like, well, it's like 10 o'clock at night. Like, oh, we messed that one up again. We're really trying to be cognizant of what time it is for everybody, because being on a call at 10 o'clock on a Friday night is just not a good thing to do. So splitting those up a little bit, and it's harder on us, right, as a leadership team, because we have to do everything twice. But it's way better if you're trying to make sure that your message is getting out to your entire team.
Thank you. That's very thoughtful, and working in a global environment requires it, really, to keep people engaged. Logistical question: if you start at 4:30 a.m., are you still working at 5 p.m. Eastern time?
No.
How are you managing that part?
No. That's good. The good thing is that, as I mentioned, a lot of the people that I work with are either on the East Coast or in London. And so most of them are drop-off lines sometime in early afternoon. So I'm doing my 4:30 start till 8 or 10 or 12 hours later, and then I'm off for the rest of the day. So, as much as I can. Sometimes I do go through, but hopefully not on a regular basis. Got to sleep sometimes.
Yeah, good. Julianne shared, said one of the books that speak to your comment about human connection is, and it looks like Reclaiming Conversation, Power Talk. I don't know, Julianne, it's difficult for me to see what the name of the book is. I don't know if you could share, or someone else.
Yeah, Sherry Turkle. She's at MIT. She has a PhD. She has a whole chair, and she writes some very interesting books about empathy. And this is a lost art of conversation in the digital world. I have it by my bedside. I've been reading it and marking it up, and it's really well, because it gets into the whole neuroscience. Like, I wrote to her and I was like, okay, I wrote a book, same topic, but you used a lot of research and data. I just did a lot of observation, but it's the smartest book I've seen about this whole topic, about why face, why energy, the neuroscience of we need the in-person interaction. And Kimberly, you made such a good point of, when at least, Zoom doesn't even work all the time, but we have the facial empathy and the recognition code. And now the new sexy is picking up the phone to call somebody, so they don't need their camera ready moment. So thank you for bringing it up, Susie. I'm following this woman around the planet because I think she's super smart at MIT. So she's got a groupie in me, and I totally recommend getting her book.
Very good. Very good. Yeah, that's the tough part, because even if we are on video, like in a town hall or something, as we all know, the pictures get smaller and smaller and smaller. There's only so many of them up there at the same time. So you do miss that nuance that you would pick up if you were in the room. So maybe smaller is a little bit better, so we can kind of see it. But I've gotten trapped on the other way too. If I'm going to call one of my colleagues, they'll ping me and they'll say, you look not happy. I'm like, oh, geez, I didn't think that little box, you could see that, so I have to be careful about what I'm showing on my face though too, so it's not when you're just in the room, you got to do it when you're on the video as well.
I don't know if others have had this experience, but I've actually had a few in-person meetings, like in a group, in a room with people. Wow. And it's a bizarre experience. It's like learning to be with people again. And I've done it both in an internal meeting as well as an external negotiation. And it's so interesting when you think back a year ago or almost 2 years ago now, when everybody kind of entered into this environment, and it's like, well, how are we going to work this way? And now it's like, well, how do we go back? Just a strange experience, but I think.
Then you get into this situation too, where before, if we were all in the same room, obviously everything's pretty much on a par. But now if you have some people that are in the room and some people that are on video, sometimes the dynamics change a little bit, and you have to be thoughtful about that to make sure you don't ignore the people that are on the video and concentrate more on the people that are together.
That's happened. That happened in my first in-person meeting where you had people on the video and we had people in the room, and the person who was leading the meeting was on the video, and he said, we should have just done it all as video because we didn't get done like what he wanted to get done, and he would have facilitated and brought everybody back or muted everybody, and he couldn't do it. It was kind of interesting. Yeah. So just going on with the rest of the comments in the chat box. Gus says we use Teams chat for quick questions. Adi Tusenko. I think Julianne talks a little bit more about the book. Rose says our company has been back full-time since May. We give people the option to join in a conference room or stay in their offices and use Teams. I know that's the same where I work at Teva Pharmaceuticals. And then Jen says, agreed, Susie, being in person more often eventually will be an adjustment. So are there any more live questions? There's nothing else left here in the chat. Oh, and another one came through. Have you developed a personal leadership skill that you may have utilized prior to the pandemic that you now embrace?
I meant to say that you have not utilized before that you now embrace. Sorry, Susie, I left the word
that I hadn't utilized.
That all of a sudden just came to fruition out of need, out of change. Yeah. Just curious.
I guess the answer I would get to that is I probably, it is all around the whole distance, right? It's all about that virtual. I mean, we just didn't use it before, or if it was one-on-one, even before the pandemic, we had video, but a lot of people just didn't use it. So it was basically, we would put up the presentation on the screen, but lots of times people didn't turn on their cameras. When I was going through the interview process at GSK, most of the people that I was interviewing with didn't even turn on their cameras. So it was very interesting, a not in-person interview and not on camera. Whereas now everybody's on camera all the time. So did I have that skill to do that virtually? I would have liked to think that I could have, but I'm sure I've gotten way better at it in the last 18 months. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions live? You can unmute yourself.
Hi, Susie. Hi, Kimberly. I'm just curious for the people that are back in the office, and then Rose had that comment, why go in the office if you're just going to sit on your computer on Teams when you could do that from home? I don't know.
We've actually given some guidance to that at GSK. We've kind of said, listen, don't come into the office and just to do email as an example, or you don't need to come back in the office if you're just going to be on video all day. So what's that going to make all of us do when we come back to the office, myself included? So I'm going back over to London in December, which I'm looking forward to, my first business trip. Like I said, woohoo! Very excited about that. But I actually have to plan. I have to schedule a desk, believe that or not. I have to actually schedule a desk that I'm going to sit at while I'm there. Never had to do that before. I just plunk down my stuff wherever. I have to schedule a desk. And then I'm going to have to be really thoughtful ahead of time about scheduling the people that I want to see to make sure that they're going to be in the office at the same time. Otherwise, to your point, I may as well not go in. I could stay back here and just do things via video. So we're all going to have to be very much more planful until this whole thing fades away, which, as I mentioned earlier, hopefully sooner than later. Until this whole thing fades away, we're going to have to be more planful. I have some of my colleagues that said, well, I'm going to come back in maybe 1 day a week or 2 days a week or 1 day a month. I got to figure out how to get them in there when I want to see them. So that's, I think, going to be a little tricky in the short term.
Thanks.
Yeah, hi, Kim, it's Rose. As far as the decision, it was really a management decision. They felt that our culture fostered more of a collaboration. So they did want people here face to face. From an employee perspective, we weren't thrilled with being back full time, all at once. We were hoping to do more of a phased in approach. But unfortunately, our senior management just didn't agree with that. And So that has been challenging because there are still some people that, you know, continue to stay, you know, closed off in their offices. So, but it's just, you know, it's just every day it's getting a little easier to be in the office on a regular basis, but it did take a little while for people to really get used to it and be back in. But luckily, we do have that flexibility. If you're still really not comfortable in being in a room with a group of people, you do have that option to.
And it should be that way, right? We've all dealt with COVID in our own special ways, and each of us have, I guess, some scars or something through this process about how we feel going forward. You know, I have friends that are happy to go back into a concert, you know, into a big arena and a concert. Not me, you know. So I'm just saying we all have our own different things, what we're coming out with this with, and we need to figure out how to accommodate that from all of our colleagues.
So Susie, this is Allison Haas from Lehigh Valley Health Network. So I really, really liked Christine's question about a personal leadership skill prior to the pandemic that maybe has been embraced. And I think that really got me thinking about the concept of empathy as a leader, because I think certainly that's something that we could all say we practiced with our teams prior to the pandemic. But I think, at least for me, and I think with a lot of the other leaders, you know, that I coach and that I work with regularly, helping them to look differently. You know, we're in healthcare, right? And so everything that we typically experience in caring for our community went in overdrive, hyperdrive, steroids, everything you can think of, right? And so that is the first thing that I think kind of popped to my mind. And that's a skill that I think is hard. It's really hard. So I'm just curious, what's your take on that? And did you experience something similar? Because I think we all know about, we have to communicate, right? We have to make sure we have rules of engagement and accountability. But I think sometimes it's those, what does it mean now to be an empathetic leader in the new world? What does that look like for you? Anyway, that's just something that popped into my head. I was curious about your thoughts.
I think some of it is actually more one-on-one type conversations as well. We're also, like many of other companies, we've been going through some transformation efforts over the last year and a half on top of everything else that's going on. So it's kind of heightened that, you know, what do we do? How do we make sure that we're communicating this properly? How do we get people on board to where we want them, you know, where we want to go as a company, et cetera? For me, you know, it just happened this week. So we had a little bit of announcement last week, and one of my team leads told me that one of the folks in his team had a really adverse reaction to the conversation. And so I just pinged him and said, hey, you got a minute? And I had a conversation, just me and her. What's going on? What happened here? What kind of stuff? So I think all of us, I know I've been doing it. I know my leads have been doing it. It's a lot more skip level conversations, you know, to get down into the organization and, you know, get those one-on-one conversations along the way. I just think we need that so much more. It might be easier to be empathetic when you're in person. And I know it's harder to come across empathetic in a large group, especially on video. That's why I think we need to supplement it with one-on-one or two-on-one or just smaller groups so that you can get those feelings across.
Right, to help make the folks feel like you're connecting with them, you care about them, they matter to you, because you're right, it's so challenging. Well, for you, it's always challenging because you're global, right? But yeah. I think it's so challenging, you know, for us, because we're more of a local community organization. So to have gone from seeing each other every day forever to now being disconnected, it was a totally different experience. So yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you, Kim.
Sure.
So Kim, thank you so much for this great discussion. I think everybody has really enjoyed your comments and the lessons we've learned from you. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for giving me a few moments to figure that out. So I am here to introduce Susan Walsh. Susan has a decade of experience fixing your dirty data. And she is called the Classification Guru. Susan is the founder and managing director of the Classification Guru Ltd, a specialist data classification, taxonomy, customization, and data cleansing consultancy. As an industry thought leader and a TEDx speaker and author of a soon-to-be published Between the Spreadsheets, Classifying and Fixing Dirty Data, she's also the creator of Coken. Susan brings clarity and accuracy to data and procurement. She helps teams work more effectively and efficiently. and cuts through the jargon to address the issues of dirty data and its consequences in an entertaining and engaging way. Susan is passionate about helping you find the value in your cleaning your dirty data and raises awareness of the consequences of ignoring issues through her blogs, her vlogs, webinars, and speaking engagements. Please help me welcome Susan Walsh to the stage.
Thanks, everybody. It is such a privilege to be here amongst all these amazing women. And today I am not going to talk to you about data at all, but I did want to welcome you into my data den, which is where all the magic happens, because I think sometimes we just need to make things a little bit more exciting. So what I want to talk to you today about is don't tell me no. So there have been a number of times in my life when I've been told no. And no's are not always direct, blunt no's. Sometimes they can be postponements, deferrals, rejections. You have to be aware of when a no is a no. It's not always really obvious. And when that has happened in my life, I've always found ways around it. Now, when I was about 12, it started off quite a crude, stubborn way, really. I wanted my ears pierced. My dad said no. And I was like, well, I don't want anything else for my birthday if I can't have my ears pierced. And he said, eventually, oh, okay then. So, in the beginning, it was, some people call it resilience. I like to call it stubbornness. That really got me what I was looking for. And I think I always have been very strong-minded and have tried to push when I really believe in things. And when I was 15, in Scotland, you're expected to stay at school until you're 18. You do your standard grades and then your higher grades, and then you go off to university. But I found out that I could leave at 16 and I could do my higher grades at college. I could be free, I could be independent, I could go and do my own thing. But of course, my dad says, you're 15, not while you're living under this roof. And I was like, but I will be 16. And no, you're not leaving school. I think, as a parent, it's probably the most terrifying thing in the world for your child to say that they want to leave school. But I did go to college. I got 2 hires. I did sit 3. Unfortunately, I failed my higher maths because I can't count. And I tried very hard, but I know I work with data, but I can't do math. So once I'd sat the exam, I knew I had failed it badly. And I needed 3 higher grades to get into university. And I went to the university and said, look, I have failed this massively. I know it's not going to come back with a good result. You're not going to let me in. Can I do a summer school to make up the difference? I really want to get in. And the course leader said, oh no, don't worry, you'll be fine. Don't worry, everyone always thinks that. And of course, the results came through the door and I opened them and I failed my maths so badly that it didn't even show up on the certificate. I mean, it was horrific. And of course, then the rejection letter from the university came and then the tears came. And my dad said, but wait a minute, you said you tried to resolve this situation. You need to go push back with them. And I guess that's the first time I got some help with saying no to something and actually not accepting it. Because I think we all have this natural reaction of when someone says no, we just go, okay. And so I did push back and I went and saw the university and I put my case forward and I did get in and I started and I did my degree in commerce. And that wasn't where the no's ended, really. My lecturer there, it's 4 years in Scotland. So I always say I did 3 years of drinking and 1 year of actual study for my degree. And I was sitting at a 2-2 the whole way through, but I really wanted a 2-1. And I said to my lecturer, I'm going to get a 2-1. And he said, no way, not a chance. So I was like, hang on a minute, nobody says that to me, I'll show you. And so I got my head down, I worked really hard. In fact, I got first class honor marks for some of his essays. So I did it for me, but I really showed him. So that's a couple of examples of no. And what I find is that when you get a no, there's always another way around. So, you know, over the wall, round the side, under, there's always different ways to get into that. And I had an experience in my early 20s when I was bullied at work. And I am a strong person, and I did try to fight back, but the onus was put on me as the person there was something wrong with me. I was in the wrong job, even though this manager had a reputation and was known as being a problem. They tried to put it on me. And so at that time, it was really a case of they're just trying to get me out. So I thought, well, if I'm going to leave, I'm going to leave on my terms. So bubbly Susan, who is, you know, cheery and friendly and smiley to everyone in the office, starts crying everywhere, sobbing her eyes out. Well, that's not a good look for HR. So I left, but I left on my terms. So, you know, it's that there's just that natural feistiness in me, and I'm not really quite sure where it comes from, possibly my gran, but it served me well. And you know, I eventually realized that I spent a lot of my career doing things that I thought I should be doing rather than what I actually wanted to do. So I thought I needed to be a sales director. That was my goal. And actually, sales isn't really sales anymore, not in a lot of industries. It's more number crunching. And, you know, especially if you sell to the retailers, it's basically give us what we want or we're taking your product off our shelves. It's not the good old relationship building, all that kind of stuff. So I wasn't really quite sure what I wanted to do, but I had an idea. This was 10 years ago, and it was at a time when internet shopping hadn't really quite taken off yet. But the type of style of clothing in offices for women was changing. It was moving away from the suits and the shirt, all that kind of stuff. And I thought, you know, I can't get what I need from a shop. So I'm just going to open my own shop. And of course, with that came a lot of people who said, oh no, you shouldn't do that. Are you crazy? Look how much it's going to cost. How are you going to manage that? And honestly, I just didn't think about it too much, but I did a business plan. I went and bought all the interior design and decorated. I bought all the stock for the shop. I marketed it. I designed my own logo. And I just went for it. And unfortunately, it was a really, really, really tough time because nobody came in. Like there were days and days and days on end when nobody came in. And, you know, that's a big no in your face, like telling you, this isn't going to work, don't do it. And I had the most amazing clothes, but people in Guildford just wanted Chanel and fancy brands, not my beautiful cheap dresses. So, you know, I tried different marketing. I tried and I fought so hard. But this was one time when I really had to accept that I had to say yes to no, and I had to close the shop. And it was so hard because I had racked up so much debt. I couldn't afford to pay someone to wind up my company. I had to do it myself. I had to deal with all the calls and letters from debt collectors and banks, you know, threatening. And I couldn't even afford to go bankrupt. I had to save up for 6 months before I could go bankrupt. I mean, it was a really, really, really dire situation. But I needed to do what I needed to do to keep moving forward. And so, you know, looking back, actually, going bankrupt was one of the best things that could happen to me because overnight, all that stress and worry just lifted. Like when you know, there'll be other situations like if you leave a job or something that's really stressful and it just goes like that. It was really, I learned a lot from the experience. But I also realized that I just needed a job now to pay my bills and I needed to do anything. So I found an ad online for a spend analytics company and they said, oh, we classify procurement data. And I was like, oh, I've never heard of that before. That sounds interesting. I've worked in a couple of companies. So yeah, I think I could probably do that. So I started doing some files for them, and I really enjoyed it. And they couldn't believe how fast and how accurate I was. And that was when something just clicked, when I really did find my passion. And, you know, through that, and this was after also the bad experience with the bullying. So I'd lost a lot of confidence at that point, and I had to keep kind of fighting and saying no to those inner demons that were saying, you're not good enough, you can't do this, you'll never be good, you know, you'll never get a good job again, you'll never find something that you enjoy again, you know, constantly just fighting those niggling thoughts in the back of my head. And I ended up staying with that company for 5 years. I grew a team, I learned so much, but then I realized I needed to move on. And this was when another no came, because at that time, I hadn't come from a procurement background, I hadn't come from a data background, and I didn't have any connections in the industry. I didn't even know what my job title was. I didn't know where I could go and find another job doing the same thing. So I had a decision to make at that point. Do I accept that that's the end of this and just go and find another career? Or do I set up another business doing what I love, offering something that nobody else seems to be talking about or offering? And so again, you know, I got the, are you crazy? Do you want to do this again? What are you doing? And I was like, no, I've spoken to people. I know that there's a need out here. I really, really have an idea. And if we just step back a little bit, in the middle of the period of working for the spend analytics company, one of the biggest challenges and no's of my life happened. And that was when my mum died. So for most of my life, she had body dysmorphia. She had depression, anxiety. She thought she looked like a monster. She wouldn't leave the house. She'd call up and be asking, you know, please tell me I look okay. And it was constant. And we tried to get her so much help. And over the years, she took so many overdoses. I can't even count how many that she took in the end. But we did joke that she was pretty much indestructible. But then she took a massive load of pills and she ended up in intensive care. And she was the illest person in the hospital in Dundee, which is used to be one of the biggest hospitals in Europe. So it's a really big hospital. And, you know, you just have to keep pushing through. And she got through that, and she was in hospital for 3 months, and she got herself up and out. And we thought, great. And she still wasn't happy. She wished she hadn't been here. And then a few months after that, she still wasn't well. And so, you know, when you've got this constant, it feels like something's against you the whole time, but you just have to keep fighting for her, because she doesn't want to fight for herself. I got her into a psychiatric hospital over Christmas. Unfortunately, they let her out on an overnight stay. And when she was due to go back, she snuck out the house, no coat, no bag, she just disappeared. And that was the worst time, because we had to wait overnight to find out that she'd been washed up on the beach in the morning. And that was a really big kind of no from the universe. Like, you just have to, like, you know, go into a hole now and be quiet. But the problem was, because she was found in a public space, it was all over social media. The newspapers were talking about it. And the one thing that we really didn't want for her was to be seen as selfish, because that was the last thing she was. She loved us so much, but she was just so mentally ill. She just lost all aspects of reality. And so we decided to take some control of our fate and the narrative. And so we went to the local paper and we told her story, and we got her on the front page. And so we really got a chance to kind of turn that around and not just accept the situation that had been given to us, we could still have some control over it. And you know, that also helped a lot of people by sharing that, because you know, there's always a lot more people going through a lot of things that you never realize until something happens, and then they want to share. And so after that, I really have lived life just every day enjoying it. And you know what? Try things. If they don't work out, so what? It doesn't matter. You know, try something else, you know, as long as you don't bet your house on something ridiculous, you know, go for it. And so that's where I come back to my business. Crazy old Susan, no connections in procurement to go and sell to, but she had a business that she wanted to sell. So the first thing I did was I went and exhibited at a recruitment event and tested the waters and found out if people were interested in my services. And of course they were. But I quickly realized that there was more no's coming my way, because they weren't looking for me, because nobody else was offering the service. So they didn't know to search for me. They didn't know to find me. And so my next challenge was really, right, how do I get people to notice me? And so over the last couple of years, I have spent a lot of time building a network on LinkedIn. I have you know, really try to position myself as knowledgeable and an expert in my area. And even at that point, you know, there's the doubters and the self-doubt in my mind saying, no, who do you think you are to say you're an expert in this? But as I've gone through this more, I do realize that I do know a lot about a very niche specific subject. So I have worked on my confidence to build on that. And then I realized that I needed to get people's attention. So connecting with people wasn't really going to be enough. And I wasn't going to grab an awful lot of people doing exhibitions. So I started doing some funny posts. And then lockdown hit. And everybody kind of just shrunk away from LinkedIn, and I went full on, and somehow, actually it's Sarah Barnes Humphrey's fault. She did a lip sync challenge that I was involved in, which started something which is now known as Lip Sync Sundays on LinkedIn, where every Sunday I do a lip sync of a different song. And so I again had those fears and those no's, like, oh, what? No, you can't be. You have to be corporate on LinkedIn. You can't do this. You can't do that. And I really pushed and have pushed those boundaries, and found that actually, guess what? People like it. People are fun on LinkedIn. You know, it's not all the boring corporate things that you might think it is. And so I've really embraced that and all the challenges that come with it. You know, I've had to really put myself out there and not be afraid of anything that comes my way. And I have to say, I have been so fortunate that I really haven't had, I think I've had one troll incident, that's it. You know, I'm really non-offensive. And so I've built an amazing network of friends now that has been just wonderful. And so, you know, I started to build that awareness. And then I also noticed that nobody else is still talking about dirty data or spend data classification or normalization or taxonomies. I'm the only one out there talking about it. There's no books, there's no training on SIPs. I'm not sure about ISM, but I thought there's an opportunity here. So in the back of my mind, things started ticking away, thinking, oh, you know, maybe you could write a book. Then I'm thinking, you don't even read books. What makes you think you could write a book? And so I put that aside for a wee while. And then about May last year, I went and met with a publisher, and it was a small publishing house, and they said, yeah, we'll help you write your book and we'll publish it, and it's going to cost you £7,000, and you're going to have to buy 500 of your books, and then, well, we're not going to market your book because you know your market better than we do. And I thought, that's not really a great deal there. And so I was going to give up. I was just going to accept that no and be like, okay, well, that's just not for me. And I spoke to a lovely lady, Caroline Carruthers, who's written a book, and she was like, no, talk to my publisher. It'll be great. So I did a book proposal for them. It went for peer review, and then they made an offer to publish last September. And the timeline was absolutely mine to own, but I decided that I really wanted the book to come out for September this year, because that's when there's lots of events going on. And so I can't believe it. I wrote a book. I wrote an actual book. And also, again, you know, I had to fight for the title because the publisher's very traditional. They work with libraries and a lot of business titles. And I said, no, like if there's one thing we have to do, it's we have to have this title, because people laugh when they see it. And that's what I want people to think about when they think about data. And so it's just like there's no's all the time. So I then hit, you know, my business has been growing, which is great. And then I had all these contractors last year and they all let me down. And I then felt like, does that mean I can't grow my business because I can't trust anyone? So I let them all go. I went back to myself, and then I found a whole load more contractors at the beginning of the year. And these ones are much better. They're really working out. And so I just keep kind of not accepting these no's that are in my path. And again, earlier in the year, I was invited to be on a webinar, and then a few days before I was withdrawn. And that absolutely devastated me. I was absolutely gutted, and it really shook my confidence. And I you know, thought maybe I shouldn't be doing all this social media stuff. Maybe it is, you know, dividing people. And then I had a word with myself and thought, no, hang on a minute, that's one person out of how many that, you know, maybe don't like what you do. You know, be authentic and keep going. And then that next week I got listed as one of the top 10 people to follow in procurement. So, you know, I'm glad I didn't listen to the negative thoughts in my mind. And that wasn't enough. I really wanted to challenge myself a little bit more. So January last year, I had never done any speaking. I had never done any podcasts. I hadn't done any webinars. And I thought, oh, maybe if I could do 2 this year, that would be nice. And maybe one live speaking event. And then did a lot of webinars and online work last year. And the opportunity to do a TEDx talk came up in January. I could apply and pitch for a talk around resilience. And, you know, that's when all the no's from internally start going off again. Oh, you can't do this. You're not good enough. Who do you think you are? You know, you're only good in the data space. So I really wanted to challenge myself, and went through a couple of auditions and got through to the final, and then stood on a stage and talked a lot about what I've shared with you today. In front of my family live streamed, who had no idea that I was going to be talking about those things, including my mum. So it was hugely nervous. In fact, I don't think I've ever had nerves as crazy as that before. And if I can give some tips to you when you hear these noses, start to recognize no's might not always be that no. So think about things in your life. You've applied for a job and you didn't get it. Don't think of it as a no. Think of it as a, okay, so how can I achieve that objective another way? So can you wait to see if that person passes their probation? Maybe that's an option. Keep in touch with HR. Is there another role within the company that you could go into and then move into the one you want? Is there a similar role in a similar company that would be just as good for you? There's different ways of tackling these no's. So the first thing that you really need to do is, when you hear that no, in whichever form it is, ask yourself, does it bother me? So if you don't get something and you're not bothered, That's great, fine, go and walk away, do whatever you need to do. If you are bothered, then ask yourself, how can I turn that no into a yes? And like with the shop, it's not always possible. Sometimes you have to accept that it's not right. But look for your alternative options, see what there are, and see if you can turn that round. And for the last 10 minutes, I really wanted to open it up and have a conversation and just, tell me, share if you've got any no's that you want to share, or no's that you might have just realized, or no's that you didn't before, or ask me questions about any of the things I've just spoken about. And let's kind of start trying to change the mindset about what a no is, because all it is a word, really. If you've got a challenge that you want help with now, I will more than happily tell you how I might approach it. But yeah, those no's can be really sneaky sometimes, and sometimes they come from within our own minds as well, and we've got to be aware of those as well. I have rationalization conversations in my head with myself all the time about should I be doing this? Should I do this lip sync with makeup smeared on my face all over the place? Oh yeah, that's a great idea. Oh yeah, then you get shadow banned on LinkedIn. Oh well, never mind. There's so many different kinds of levels of no as well. And I think we just need to grab it and say no to no, and say, right, I'm going to do it a different way. I'm going to do it my way. If you are in a job that you're not happy with, how can you be happy? So can you change within the company? Can you change jobs, change companies completely? Is it the job you're unhappy with, or is it something else? Because actually, maybe you want to start your own business. And if you do, everyone will tell you it's crazy, it's too risky, and there's all these reasons why, and you might not be able to get funding, and well, maybe postpone it for a wee while. Save up a bit more, then do it. Don't be put off by these, oh, you don't get the house you want. Well, save up a bit more and then go buy a better house. Let's not focus on the negatives. Sometimes no's can be an opportunity, it can lead to better things.
Yeah, Susan, that's great. Thank you so much for all that. I totally agree with you. And I can relate to the whole inner voice, putting you down and telling you not good enough. And, until you find where you really belong, sometimes that inner voice is against you. You need to really own up to that. So if anyone has any questions for Susan, please, either unmute yourself or put it into the chat. So I do have a couple of comments that came up here. There was a link to Susan's podcast episode with Elizabeth that was provided by Jennifer, and Larissa what was that?
So that's my LinkedIn as well, but I think Larissa's got a question.
Yep, I can see that. How can we respond or react to earned elevation in the workplace that is often overlooked or even dismissed?
Oh, that's a really good question. Before all of the business, I did work in companies where, I thought, you have no idea how much I do, and when I'm gone, you're going to realize. It's really hard, because I think, I can't remember who, maybe it was with Elizabeth, I was having the conversation around how women are really good at just keeping things going. We'll just solve problems before they happen. And so, nobody really notices. And go on holiday. let them deal with it, and then they'll find out. Like, just go on holiday and don't leave that nice list of notes for things on how to do stuff. I can't tell you the number of jobs I've left where I've left a detailed document and like screen printouts of what to do, and then gone to a new job and they're like, there's the computer, off you go. And I've got a friend who's in that exact situation right now, and they're just dumping a whole load of stuff on her. There's no notes or anything. Go on holiday, let them figure it out, and then they'll soon realize. Or that's my best advice. If they, not just like a couple of days, go for 2 weeks and let them really suffer and struggle.
That's great.
And actually, I think that's
from Jennifer.
I was saying,
I just wanted to share that Jennifer thought that there was such an amazing story that you shared, and that it really ties into the previous conversation around, getting away from the negative self-talk. So great.
So I was going to say, we kind of, I remember when I was at school, I had a modern studies teacher, and she had this sign on the wall, and it said, women have to work twice as hard to be half as good as men. And that kind of always stuck with me. And we don't look after ourselves. We should be looking after ourselves more. And that's something that I'm still learning to do. And because guess what, when we're tired, when we're run down, when we're hungry, everything seems worse. And all those self-doubts creep in. And, I'll give you an example of today has been horrific for me. I was at an event. So I live in Guildford in the UK, and Basingstoke is maybe, I don't know, it was like a 50-minute drive in the taxi this morning. But I thought, I'll just get the train back, because I was carrying lots of stuff there. I got stuck in this hotel literally in the middle of nowhere in the country for 2.5 hours. 4 times we had to phone to get a taxi because it kept being on its way. I missed so many trains. I had to do a call on the train and walking home. And I literally just got home like 10 minutes before I logged in here. And it's like, no, I'm not going to let you ruin my day, universe, because people can't do their jobs. So tomorrow I'm going to look after myself. I'm going to take it easy, and not just keep powering through because, I'll get ill or, run down. And I think, I think as women, we probably do feel that we work harder or have to prove more or be heard or seen more, and we don't necessarily take the time for ourselves. And a lot of the women here will be mothers as well, which makes it even crazier because you have even more to fit in with. I mean, I don't know how you do it. I can barely look after myself, let alone little people. It's mad. So yeah, I think that also is good for our mental health, which then stems more positivity, and then like, yes, we can take on the world and we can do all of this. But yeah, I do find that not being recognized in the workplace is really tough, and actually sometimes you've just got a crap manager and that's not going to change. And again, you've got that no in front of you, right? So what do? Do I stay with this manager and wait for them to leave? Do I leave? Do I move somewhere else? Or can I catch the attention of someone else in the business who might catch on? So the example again, my friend that's just started this job, who's just been dumped all this stuff on her. She's been working 10-hour days, and the CEO was in a meeting and called her out and said, your hard work hasn't gone unnoticed. So maybe we need to just aim higher than the next level of management to catch the attention. It depends what you're working on. Do a nice report, like do a fancy chart or something that's different that nobody else is doing, that they're going to go, who did that? And it probably sounds a bit simplistic, but just really start thinking about different ways of of how you could do something. You know, how do I get that promotion? I'm not really getting anywhere with what I'm doing now. So who else can I talk to in the business? You know, who can I collaborate with? Maybe on a project or something, get a bit more visibility somewhere else in the business. You know, think about those things.
Yep. Well, great, Susan. This has been a wonderful talk. I don't see any additional questions. We really appreciate you being a part of our day today, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Since 1901, there have been 844 Nobel Awards granted to men and 48 to women. And while Goran Hansen says it's sad that there are so few women Nobel laureates, how do we ensure a level playing field and still promote competition and fairness? Allyship is surely one of the answers, and I'm thrilled to be here with this Fab Four to talk about allyship in concept, theory, and practice. Before I introduce our panelists, I do want to recognize that there may be sensitivities and possible feelings of exclusion from some during this session. To level set, an ally is defined as someone who is not a member of an underrepresented group, but holds a position of privilege and power and can advocate and take action to support that less represented group without taking over their voice. This session is dedicated to allyship for women in the workplace and not intended to exclude nor diminish the equality of any other underrepresented group. Now for our panelists. For the past 8 years, Dave Loughery has held senior finance roles with Teva Pharmaceuticals. Currently, he's Vice President of Revenue Optimization and Contract Compliance. George Ellis is the Director of Global Logistics Procurement at Corteva. As a member of Corteva's Global Procurement Leadership Team, George is responsible for directing global sourcing and supplier management activities related to transportation and warehouse services. Lisa Austin is the Director of Diversity, Inclusion, Equity, and Racial Justice and HR Business Partner at the Girl Scouts of the USA. Lisa is also an accredited certified life coach specializing in mindset, emotional intelligence, transformation, and self-mastery. Philip Ideson is the founder and managing director of Art of Procurement, where he hosts the world's leading podcast and leads the delivery of their membership community and consulting business lines. Welcome, Dave, George, Lisa, and Phil.
Thank you.
Thanks, Larissa.
Thank you.
Let's jump right in. I want to make sure we have George on the line. George, are you with us today?
I am right here.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Thank you. So allyship means different things to different people, right? Tell us, what does allyship mean to each of you, and how do you encourage allyship in your workplace or your industry?
Well, go ahead, George.
What I was going to say is I think allyship means understanding the challenges that women face in the workplace, the history of discriminatory treatment in the workplace, and working proactively to help women overcome some of those challenges that certainly still exist today. So the key word in all of that for me is proactivity, and taking proactive steps, not waiting, but seeing opportunities to provide help and assistance.
Lisa, were you going to respond as well?
Yes, I was. Thank you. I think of allyship as when people of non-marginalized identities support the act and solidarity of those who have experienced marginalization and discrimination. And I really think that allyship is distinct from advocacy or activism. And those terms are usually used in the context of individual actions and education to support causes and people, whereas advocacy and activism is more or less about working together with others to challenge systems and affect change. So when I think about allyship, I think about it on the more individual level of supporting individuals within a certain group or within a workplace, if you will. That's kind of what I think about, in addition to what George has said as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really partnering. And I think one of the key things that Larissa, that you said around not taking away someone's voice, I think it's key. I mean, one of the key features of being an ally is to listen. I mean, to really be an effective ally, you need to be able to understand and empathize. And the only way to really get there is to truly listen.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, from my perspective, just to kind of build on what's been said before, it's one of those topics that I think there's some vulnerability in talking about as well. It's certainly the first time that I've spoken publicly on something like allyship. And, you know, from one level, it's just as simple as treating everyone with the same respect, no matter who they are. It's about advocating for folks. You know, it's advocating for people's success, helping break down roadblocks, break down barriers that they may face along the way. Now, in the position that we're in terms of a media organization, for me, it's also about helping to amplify voices of people who may previously have been marginalized in terms of their ability to do so. So I think that proactivity is really important.
Thank you all for helping us level set the start here. So now that we know what each of you feel and kind of have positions on what it means to you, tell me about the mindset that's needed to be a successful ally to women in the workplace.
Now I can just build on, you know, from a mindset perspective, I think it's the same mindset for anyone to be successful in the workplace, not necessarily just women or any other kind of marginalized group. It's the responsibility of all of us, I feel, to help provide opportunities to learn, to grow, to provide an environment that's flexible to any work-life needs that anybody has, you know, help navigate roadblocks along the way. So I think if you have that mindset, now, you know, we talked about proactivity for groups who may have been marginalized in the past, and certainly I think focusing on ensuring that you're doing so. But I think you take that mindset and apply it to everybody. That I mean, that's kind of the approach that I take, is like, how can you just help folks grow? How can you help people be the best versions of themselves, and apply that to any part of the community, to be honest.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on what Philip is saying, I think a growth mindset or a transformational mindset is really what is needed. When I think about growth mindset, I think of it as being able to develop your skills and your intellectual abilities. And I think people who have that mindset really look at their mind as being a muscle, something they can strengthen or something they can use as they kind of develop and strengthen their intelligence to improve who they are and the things around them. It really does help to have that to affect change. So I think it's a transformational mindset that is important.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it, just like anything else, to be really successful, you need to be open-minded. If you don't have that, then you're probably not going to be. And I think the other thing you need to be willing to do is to challenge norms. You have to be willing to go out and challenge the status quo. I mean, if everything was working well, then people wouldn't need allyship. So you need to be someone that's willing to go out there and maybe stand on your own a little bit to challenge some of the current culture.
So knowing when to show up as an ally for women can be a really challenging opportunity, right? What was the pivotal moment or occurrence that made you realize you needed to be an ally for women in the workplace? I'd like to ask George this question, please.
Sure. You know, showing up as an ally as I think about it, can happen in a number of different ways. Sometimes in a meeting, in front of other people, there's an opportunity to really bolster, lift up, recognize people that otherwise might not be recognized or need visible support, in more of a public setting. I think of situations where there are opportunities to provide support, feedback, et cetera, on a one-on-one basis, to let a person know, let a woman know that, you have her back, that you are a supporter, and to be an encourager. A third way, in my experience, is for folks that have tremendous talent, to provide those individuals with challenging assignments. That's probably one of my favorite things to do from a developmental standpoint. Oftentimes, people, and I've experienced this myself personally, don't realize how good they are or how smart they are until they're put in a situation where they are stretched. And giving stretch assignments is an incredibly powerful way to move someone, help someone grow to the next level. And it's also a very powerful way to send a message to the rest of the organization that that individual has a tremendous growth opportunity because they're being given special attention, special assignments, and given the opportunity to shine in the organization.
Thank you, George. Dave, was there a moment or a light bulb that went off for you that made you realize your time to be an ally for women in the workplace?
Yeah, actually, I can kind of build on what George just said. So, a number of years ago, more than 10, I was with another really large pharmaceutical company. And being in finance, I had a team that was myself and 4 women. But every quarter we'd have to go and review our results, and we would sit in a room, and it would be me and a whole bunch of people that looked a lot like me reviewing those results. And so I kept kind of pushing and talking about how strong some of the women on my team were. But then it finally came clear that I needed to kind of show how strong they were. So, I used the excuse that I'm sure everyone was tired of hearing me every quarter talk. So 2 of the women who were really strong, we started taking turns and letting them be the presenter. We let them kind of go through the broader team and kind of show how good they were, right, to the whole team. And it took some working with them to get them ready for it, because you don't want someone to fail in that type of situation. But it proved to be really empowering. And as a unplanned outcome of it, it actually helped me a lot too. It allowed me to develop skills where I had to figure out when to back off and allow someone to maybe struggle a little bit but work their way through something, or when to jump in so that they didn't go under for the 3rd time. So it paid a lot of benefits, I think, for everyone.
Thanks, Dave. How about you, Lisa? When did you find your place to become an ally in the workforce?
I was muted there. As a female, my place was set for me, right, to be an ally to other females in the workplace. But I think much of what has been said by the others here resonate with me as well. I really think as a female, I found my place as having to think about my role as a mentor or a coach or someone who was helping bring along other females so they can have their voice as well, and to also challenge the status quo. Lots of times, being a woman of color and being a female, I was often the only one in the room. And so it often came to that opportunity for me to set that example and to not so much be the representative, but be a voice and make a way or a trailblaze, if you will, for other women to also have themselves represented and heard and seen and valued in the workplace.
Thank you so much, Lisa. How about you, Phil?
I don't know, it's a really good question. You know, I think when I started in my kind of corporate journey, I started in the automotive industry. And actually a lot of very strong characters within the automotive industry, whether it's male or female. You know, it's one of those industries where I think that it's funny, you know, from the outside in, you might look at it as being a white male dominated industry, but you get inside the industry and it's just, there's a lot of strong characters, like say male or female. And I think that, so you grow up kind of in this environment where you are used to it not mattering, you know, who you are, what your background is, whether you're male, whether you're female, everyone's kind of equal. And then you go into other areas and industries or companies, and that's not the same. And I think that's kind of, for me, was a, you know what, I went in not realizing that it wasn't as much of an issue as it was until you see it in other environments and you think that, you know, this is something that, because, you know, I'm a big believer in, as I said at the very beginning, it shouldn't matter, you know. And so seeing in other companies where women, for example, didn't get the opportunities that men may have done, then that's something that, you know, I wanted. I realized that it's on me and everybody around me that has the ability to help women grow in those organizations to do so, you know, and that it becomes more of a personal responsibility. So I'd say seeing the differences between those areas where it's not so much of an issue versus those that it is, was probably the light bulb moment for me.
You mentioned the automotive industry, and I wonder, you know, if you find with your outside in view to the rest of us all here today, with so many industries represented at ISM, do you find that more industries are in need of allyship more than others, or maybe some of the industries are making strides faster than others?
You know, yeah, you're right. You know, I've had the opportunity to see a lot of different industries throughout my career, and I think that maybe there's one industry here or one industry there where it's a little harder, or where maybe there's more progress that needs to be made. But my general feeling on this is it's down to individual companies. It's not necessarily industry specific. So it's what the culture of an individual company, you know, is. Does the company empower its employees regardless of, you know, male, female? Are they you know, there's not the pay gaps that you see sometimes. Is there championing and promoting of flexible working, or whatever it is that is needed to kind of level the playing field, if you will? Does the organization have that culture, or does it not? So I think it's less about industries than it is companies. But I mean, I'd love other people's perspectives as well, who may have, you know, that's from somewhat of an outsider perspective, because, you know, I'm kind of looking in from the outside. But if there's certain industries that you've seen, or anybody else on the panel that that do need more help, I would love to know.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. About a year and a half ago, there was a great story about the Philadelphia Flyers, right? So a professional hockey team that has 7 or 8 women in senior leadership roles, from president, CFO, and senior VPs of marketing all the way down. There's probably no more male-dominated industry than, say, professional hockey, and yet they were an example of what can be done. So I think it is probably more organizational than industry.
George, did I see that you might have something to add to this?
No, I was going to agree with Philip and Victor on that. I mean, David, on that. I think it boils down to individual companies predominantly. But, you know, there are industries that don't have their fair share of women in leadership roles. And there certainly are a number of those industries. We certainly need to continue seeing, more women in leadership roles and financial services and manufacturing, just to name a couple. But, even within those industries, it depends on the individual company.
Thank you. Thank you. And Lisa, knowing some of your background with leadership consulting and working in health services and now with Girl Scouts and expanding into life coach, can you tell me your perspective on the subject?
Well, my background's primarily in that area of the nonprofit space and healthcare, and primarily in the nonprofit space, there's a lot of female leadership representation, especially in the Girl Scouts. We kind of combat the other issue. We don't have a lot of male leaders in those the chief officer roles and things like that. But I think in nonprofit in organizations, you do see a lot of female leadership. And I also think in healthcare, I think that's true as well. There are female leadership roles that are pretty high in ranking in the healthcare industries. As far as life coaching, a lot of my coaching is not necessarily around career. It's more about life and success coaching, but not necessarily on the career path. So I haven't really had too much of an opportunity to speak with women around those issues. But I do think from my experience that there is the industry of healthcare education, nonprofit, tends to be represented well by women. Always more work to do, but definitely represented.
Thanks, Lisa. And while I have you, I'm really interested to know your thoughts on biases. Is it possible? Is it possible that both men and women are bringing biases to the table that could thwart this hopeful focus on allyship? And if we are trending in that direction, how has allyship turned around and combated those biases?
Well, the answer is absolutely yes. We all, male, female, bring biases to the table that can thwart allyship. We just do. People are naturally biased. And even when we intend to be completely fair about things, our brain, hardwires things and really does sometimes have a hard time remaining impartial. And that's just who we are as people. So I don't think you can leave them out of the mix, the biases. I don't think they could be left out of the mix. And the biases really are ways that we make sense of our information. I don't need to go into a conversation about that necessarily, but it's really us placing people in certain categories based on our experiences and the associations that we've had. And so it's almost impossible not to bring them into the workplace or to the table. But what we really can do about that is take inventory of what our biases are, whether they're implicit or unconscious, and really making a thoughtful effort to begin to unlearn our socialized thinking or sexism or whatever it might be that the bias is around. And I really think that that pathway is what will take us there, that idea of understanding that we have them, recognizing it, owning it, and then doing what it takes to begin to unlearn some of those socialized ways of thinking that we have. And I think the real path to that is understanding your individual behavior and taking those changes or making those changes on an individual level. And that's where we can begin to build relationships and really support other people within the workplace.
Other panelists, what say you?
I completely agree. I mean, it's sad, right? But we all know people, and they may be well-meaning, who may look at a woman of a certain age and say, well, you know what, she's probably going to get ready to have kids soon, or maybe she has young kids and she probably doesn't want this extra responsibility now added to her life. And so as she said, like, have that conversation. Don't make that assumption. Don't have that. You may be well-meaning, but you still have a bias, and it's not fair. And you need to have those conversations and give each individual the opportunity to make those choices for them, not you making those choices for them.
All right. So we've talked about what allyship means to us, what it looks like, how to unlearn our biases, be challenging, and to be proactive. With all of these opportunities for allyship in the workplace, where do you think the biggest need is?
I think there's a big need to be a visible, intentional champion of women and others in the workplace that need extra support. And to build a reputation as an ally, which I think, as you can see from the comments, is extremely valuable to have colleagues and friends that know what you're about because of the impact and results and the individual touch that you have in terms of their development and growth and opportunities. So just to summarize, I think very powerful ways are to step out and build a reputation as an ally, and there are tremendous benefits of that.
Thank you, George. So we know that active listening is one of the techniques known to enable allyship. Listening to understand helps allies act with insight to support another person. And with our workforce decreasing from boomers and Gen Xers, and the majority filled by millennials and Gen Z, is there a different level of importance for the aging workforce versus the younger? Dave, what do you think? Oh, I'm sorry, Phil, I think you were about
No,
to
I was going to
speak.
say, and I don't know the answer to that, I guess, which is why the pause, because it's a really tough one to answer. You can, as an ally, I think, try and be understanding and empathetic of the challenges that are faced. But honestly, I'd love to hear others' opinions, because I'm kind of stumped a little bit on how to respond.
Yeah, where I got stumped. Go ahead, George.
No, David, you go ahead. I'll follow you.
What I was going to say was where I got stumped was when you said, is there a different level of importance? So I think there's a difference. I don't know if the importance is different. So I do think we need to be aware, though, right? I think a lot of us are seeing in the workplace now, especially with COVID, that a lot more of the younger workforce is really keen on working from home and the ability to do that. Those of us that have spent years working in an office can relate to the benefits of that to some degree. But if we already know that there's some inherent biases or challenges, I think we need to be aware, if we're going to be in a position where people are not seen as actively as often, how do we make sure that that doesn't become a further detriment to people?
So this question is about active listening. And as I read the question, is there a difference in the importance of active listening when dealing with baby boomers and Gen Xers versus younger folks? No, I think active listening is always important in coaching, mentoring, sponsoring. I think the personal challenges that folks face, across the generations are different. Boomers, Gen Xers that, they have kids in college, or they may be grandparents like myself, headed towards retirement. So the things that we think about as we barrel towards retirement, are very different than those who are up and coming, and trying to get their, first big break, let's say, from a career standpoint. So I think active listening is always important across the board, really understanding a person's interests, goals, challenges. Also active listening to determine what they don't know that they don't know. So identifying and helping people understand their blind spots can be extremely valuable. And, you know, figuring out those blind spots sometimes can be helped by active listening.
Yeah, I can't add much more to that, but I do think that the key in that is the active listening and the listening to understand, and knowing that understanding means you've got to understand the individual, you've got to understand their generation, you've got to understand, you know, a whole bunch of things. It's not just the words that they're saying. You've got to go a little deeper in the understanding. And I think that really is what's important. And if there's, you know, a way that you do that differently, you can apply active listening as the skill and the technique, but you've got to apply active hearing, if you will, to the differences that the different perspectives and lifestyles and generational spaces that people occupy, to really impact how that will affect relationships and progress in the workplace. And I'm thankful Phil asked for us to kind of think about that, because it stumped me a little bit too. Mm-hmm. It's like, how do we answer this? So thank you for that, Phil.
I mentioned early on, with all due respect, that some of these questions were not going to be easy. But you know, as much as I'm trying to push buttons, not trying to turn anyone away. But I think there is some disparity in how we listen and how we hear an aging workforce versus up and comers. And so much of it has to do with our methods of communication. I think someone earlier on in the conference said, you know, it's the new sexy to pick up the phone and call someone. I was fascinated by that statement.
You know, that is an interesting point, though, just generally about how we communicate, because we do communicate very differently. Like, you know, the thought of picking up the phone gives me the heebie-jeebies sometimes, you know, and I'm much more comfortable sending Slack messages or text messages or things like that. And you kind of lose the sense that that's not everybody's preferred method of communication, for sure.
So Dave, this question's guided towards you just because I've heard about it in the past. I think you brought it up in some other conversations that we've had, but I would like to hear from everyone as well about the importance of allyship on the micro level and the macro level, right? What differences are we seeing between one-on-one interactions versus creating or even changing a culture toward allyship?
Yeah, I think they're both extremely important. So I think those one-on-one interactions and the ability to have that, and being an ally, it can be mentorship, but it also can be just opening doors. It could be, you know, introducing someone to someone else who will help that person in their career, or get them opportunities, or get them exposure that they're looking for. And sometimes it's just making an introduction for them. It doesn't have to be guidance. It can be it can come in a lot of different forms, and I think those are all important. I also think it's really important, and George started to go into this, of being seen as an active proponent for whatever changes you're looking to try to make, and to be known for that, and to, especially if you're in a position of some influence, to making sure that within your scope and within your sphere that you can allow those discussions to take place, to actively listen, like we said, but to also foster an environment that says, this is what we're going to do. You know, we're going to be very proactive here. We're going to be very positive about these things. And, you know, we talk a lot about diversity and inclusion, you know, in the workplace now, right? But to me, diversity, which is fantastic, can also start to become a bit of a census item if we're not careful. If you have diversity without inclusion, then it starts to lose a little bit of its value. So I saw a great thing just the other day on LinkedIn, and it was a small story about a young woman at 26. She unexpectedly got pregnant, told her boss she loved her job, and he said, wow, you just ruined your whole career. So she didn't last too long there. 4 years later, she was at a new employer, and her boss was asking her if she was planning to have more kids. And she was kind of hemming and hawing and saying, and he said, if you decided to, this office is plenty big for a bassinet. And she talked about how after she had her second son, she brought the son in, and people would take turns, helping her sometimes and doing different things. And we can't all do that in our workplaces, but it was a great example of somebody who just showed his level of support for her and the difference that brought to her, from her earlier experiences. And I think it's important to stand up like that.
Well, I guess a couple of things that kind of resonate with me in that scenario that you explained, or even in your comments, was I agree, diversity and inclusion are important, but I think what really is the key and the secret ingredient in all of that sauce is the belonging. We can let folks, we can have the diversity and have that show up, and we can have people feel like they're included by inviting them to the table. But do they really feel as though they belong in that organization? Do they belong as a part of what is happening? Are they a part of that culture of belonging? And I think that, to me, is where a lot of efforts fail, because we're talking about, let's make sure we look like our customer, or we look like our community, or whatever it is you're trying to make sure you're representing as far as diversity. And you can invite me to the meeting, or you can invite me to the party, but am I dancing at the party? Am I having a good time? Do I feel like these are my people at the party? So I think there's a difference in looking at that. And the other comment about the story on LinkedIn, I'd love to know what generation that was in, or what time and space that was in, because a lot of that's discriminatory practice and should not be allowed in any workplace. So I'm just curious as what that timing was like to even have that have occurred. Sounds a little crazy to me from my HR hat to hear that happen.
Yeah, the impression I got was it's current, right? It was something that, she's now in her maybe early 30s with her second child, so not something that happened 30 years ago. But I agree with your point. I mean, that was my point around inclusion, right? So we can have a list of all different types of people that we have, but if everyone doesn't have a voice at the table and an opportunity to succeed and it's the same as everyone else's, then we're really not inclusive, right? And that's what we need to do. So you said it more eloquently as the ability to dance at that event, but I think that's what's most important.
So I was going to move into talking about working remote and how that might have changed the ability for women to be recognized. But I think to jump right in and press the pedal down a little bit and ask the panel, what are some ways that male advocates can make a difference? If we're looking to men to make a difference in this forum.
Well, I would say some of what we've already discussed, just listening more and speaking less, because I do think that listening, as we've all talked about already, is really that key to allyship, and really taking the opportunity to provide space and not take up that space, like really make space for women in the workplace. And I think a couple of our panelists have talked about that as well. I think it's important to maybe not, or to resist the urge, if you will, to impose their ideas about how to do things versus, and save, certain populations in the workplace. And I also think it's important to ask the question, ask, what people need and really how they can help to the effort, and not make the assumptions of what people may need or not need or want or not want. I think it's important just to simply ask. And I think that really does make a huge difference. And lastly, I would probably add that they can just make a difference by being a sounding board. And again, back to the listening and looking for opportunities to create space for women in the workplace as they are being allies.
Larissa, no, sorry, go ahead. No, I was actually, George, I was going to pose the question. I was going to put my interviewer hat on that I often do for my podcast and ask Larissa, what do you feel? What's your perspective on this? Because I'd love to know a little bit, and anybody in the comments too, because I think all of us, with all the best intentions in the world, want to be guided to know how we can help advocate the most.
Yeah, I love it when you flip the switch, Phil. From my perspective, I think the fearlessness to raise up a woman is really undervalued, but the fearlessness to ask, I think it was Lisa who just said to ask. Don't be afraid to ask, because rolling up the sleeves and sitting around the circle, I think that there's a hesitation and a fear to get it wrong. And I think the worst way you can get it wrong is by doing nothing. So taking a chance, in my opinion, is one of the best ways a male can step forward. You might get it wrong. We get it wrong all the time, but watching it go by, watching injustice go by and unfairness go by, I think is worse than not trying.
Thanks, Larissa.
Yeah, I to your point, I'd love to see if somebody wants to take themselves off mute and answer that question themselves. It's a great question, Phil.
And George, I think I spoke across you, so I'm not sure if you were going to add anything into the debate.
No, I was just going to kind of go full circle back to one of the things I said at the top: proactivity, right? And what's a significant way male advocates can make a difference is being proactive, and specifically in ways that communicate that you're open to having one-on-one development and communication and mentoring conversations where you can really understand an individual's challenges and kind of use your experience to make some suggestions or ask the right questions. Even more importantly, as a coach, right, asking the right questions that challenge the person to perhaps think a little bit differently. And oftentimes, the best coaches ask questions and guide a person towards a better place. Lisa smiling.
I am. I love coach talk.
Christine, did we have anybody from the participants come in the chat? Did they want to answer that question about how they feel male allies can be better advocates?
I am not seeing that so much in the chat. Definitely there were questions though overall, but not that I'm seeing right now on the chat to that particular question.
Okay, let me take a couple of extra minutes and ask one more, because I did see a bunch of chat happening. So I think we have a number of general questions.
We do.
Panelists, I'd like to know what each of you have learned personally on your journey in allyship, and what do you think, how you've helped people, how you've mentored people, some personal success stories in your positions of being an ally, please.
Well, for me, it's a great joy to see people gain confidence and to see them get promoted. And that's just a real high, for me, because that's part of the objective. Folks that are significantly challenged and they decide not to quit. Oftentimes, we don't get to where we could get to because we quit too soon. And having resilience and intestinal fortitude to stick out tough times. I know for me, that's certainly a lesson, that I've learned, in my journey, that you can't always just quit. Sometimes you have to fight through things. You have to get help. You have to look in the mirror and be honest with yourself about what are the changes that I need to make in order to be more effective, more successful.
Yeah, and I have to piggyback on that, because what was in my mind was just that allyship is an ongoing journey. I mean, it starts from within and it gradually impacts others. And so I really think it's, the whole idea of that self-discovery of who you are and how you show up to support others, and then making that impact, I think is important. And as George said, it's that whole satisfaction, the joy of knowing that I helped someone else take their first step in the journey, travel along their path of growth and development, and being successful. So there's a number of stories I could share about how I've helped women who were maybe not seen as maybe being promotable or what have you, but between understanding that at a personal level and understanding what that means as an HR professional, I've been able to help a lot of people move forward in their careers, and it is a good feeling. And mostly it has been women. And but I work for the Girl Scouts. So I'm all about female leadership and development, right? So, but I do think that there's knowing and that understanding that the journey does start within, and then it gradually does impact others along the way.
David said something right at the beginning, I think, about don't make assumptions. And I think that's one of the really important things, because it's very easy to make assumptions about other people's situation. And we talked a lot about active listening as well throughout. My situation in terms of where I work is probably different from everybody else on the panel, because I'm in a very small organization, a 4-person organization that we started a few years ago. I'm definitely the odd one out because it's me and 3 women. So, that's kind of our work environment. I think for me, what gives me a lot of pride and joy is being able to provide opportunities that were not necessarily available in the traditional workforce. Opportunities that provide, flexible working environments or hours or whatever it is that somebody needs to succeed to be the best version of themselves again, that's not structured within a traditional framework. And so that's where I kind of see is like, how can we provide the platforms to make each individual successful, as opposed to trying to push everybody in through the same kind of, whether it's working practices or working hours or whatever that may be, and it's contingent upon me to try and create the environment that everyone can succeed in.
Yeah, for me, the biggest thing has been is awareness, right? Just it needs to start with just being aware of the situation, and from there, if you're not aware, then it's going to be very difficult to act. But if you are aware and you're motivated, then it becomes a lot easier. And so, unfortunately, the environment I work in, there's a lot of times I'll sit in meetings and it may be either all male or it could be 8 men and a woman or things of that nature. So it's human nature sometimes, if you're not part of that larger crowd, to maybe sit back or take a less of a seat. So be aware and take those opportunities to reach out and make sure that person is included. It can be soliciting their feedback or whatever it is in order to make sure that they feel comfortable participating in the larger group. It's the best way to start, I think.
Thank you so much. Christine, can you see if we have some questions?
Yes, we definitely do. One question, because we know it was brought up and discussed in here about challenging norms or the current culture within an organization. But if someone walks into a company culture that does not or appears to not promote allyship or advocacy, or is not taking that extra step to start that, how can an individual make that first step, knowing that that could be quite intimidating for someone? If you're walking in somewhere where you really don't feel that it's going on, but you want to make a difference, but you might feel like you're a party of one and be very intimidated. So what's some way that that person can make those first steps in those instances?
Yeah, I think that's a really hard situation for somebody to walk into. And on one side, it's easy to say, it depends on the strength of their conviction and their beliefs of allyship, and do they value that over the comfort of saying nothing and doing nothing, and all against all the things that we talked about today about proactiveness. But I also think that no matter what situation you walk into in any organization, you can make a difference, and that difference may only be a small difference. It may be finding somebody that's in your team, or somebody that that you can help coach or be an ally to, give confidence to, and it may just be one person. That's everything has got to kind of start there if you're walking into an environment where there isn't that culture. But I do think it's very difficult, and you need a lot of strength to be in that position and to really stand up for what you believe in.
I think just to piggyback on that, Volk used the word culture. There are a few ways to shape culture. So leaders, owners shape culture, and influencers shape culture as well. And parachute into an organization that, let's say, needs some help in terms of moving the needle relative to advancing women. I think having the fearlessness to have direct conversations with leaders that are in power in that organization is one way. Another way of moving the needle is to understand who are the key influencers in the organization that may not be the CEO or CFO, and try to drive a change by working through the influencers in an organization. Those with informal power.
I'm going to read another question, Larissa. And Anu, it's actually your question, so I might ask you to clarify if I'm not catching this correctly. But Anu was asking, has anyone ever had the experience of being an ally and the person did not live up to it? How did you handle it?
I think that's another great question. I can say that I have had that experience when I was back in the corporate side. At the end of the day, I don't see that is because it's a male or a female thing. What I mean to say is that there are folks in the workforce who you promote or champion or advocate for that for whatever reason doesn't end up the way that you anticipate it going, or that that everyone has a bad experience. And I don't look at that as being, well, it's because I was trying to be an ally. It's just that's just that individual. So I think it's really important not to let experiences like that shape opinions on doing it again, because it could happen whether it's male, female, whoever it is that you're trying to help be an ally to.
And then Larissa, I can keep going because there's a good amount of questions in here. So you tell me on time. You're on mute, Larissa.
Sorry about that. I'm fighting
No
with
problem.
landscapers today. I would love to keep going with the questions, but I do want to be respectful of the timing for the rest of the program. Folks who asked questions who didn't have them answered, please bring them up on LinkedIn. Let's keep the conversation going. Let's keep the topic going. It doesn't end with this. I thank you so much for your excellent perspectives, panelists, and for the great questions. Thank you, Christine, for your support. I do hope that this session has planted some seeds for everyone to cultivate and bring forward. So thank you again. Next.